Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku was Bakugo's Cupid? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
It is with great regret that I must notify you that we must reschedule. Even though Asui Suyu had encountered many tough villains over the years who had actually hurt her, those words were like a kick to the gut, and the news still caused her a great deal of pain. Glancing toward the door, the sea-green-haired woman looked up from the notes she had been going through for the past 10 minutes. One of the producers, who was the youngest and clearly the least experienced, was standing there. She must have always been assigned the worst assignments because she was also assigned to deliver this news. Sue shivered and avoided looking into the young producer's eyes, but she could see how sorry she was despite the terrible wave of disappointment and frustration that swept over her. Someone made a mistake and they double-booked. If that's okay, we can reschedule you for next time. She sounded very uncertain as she asked. Sue would like to think that she had mastered the art of spotting dishonesty over the years. It was a very helpful tool for dealing with both media people and villains. We're going to call you. Sue might try to confront the woman about her lies if she didn't appear so anxious, but today's heroine chose not to. She wasn't particularly excited to come here today, to be honest. The talk show producers gave Sue very little notice, and she would have preferred to have more time to get ready and look her best. However, yesterday's rescue operation was much more complicated and time-consuming because of a crisis at one of the oil platforms. After the situation was resolved, Sue and a few others were made to work overtime, and the poor heroine hardly slept for 4 hours before they called to schedule her interview for tonight. Sue needed that interview to finally discuss her Kids at the Beach project, and they appeared to be very eager and convincing. Sue was initially tempted to reschedule, but she felt that it was too unprofessional and that she wouldn't have another chance because the show had already rescheduled her twice. She had previously told herself it wasn't a big deal. She understood if they would prefer to take someone else because she wasn't nearly as popular as the other heroes, but it felt really rude to cancel on her for the third time. She still thanked the young producer for her time, grabbed her bag, and walked slowly in the direction of the elevator. Sue tried to lift her spirits by telling herself, at least, I can go home and catch some sleep, but it didn't seem to work as she had hoped. There were moments like these when she wished she wasn't always so composed. She was aware that making a scene would be pointless. It would only result in negative publicity for her and even fewer opportunities for her cause, but... Whoa! Sue's dark eyes widened slightly as she began to look through her bag, only to groan inwardly when she discovered that the project notes, the reason she had bothered with this interview, were missing. She sighed as she exited her car and headed back to the elevator, hoping that her notes would still be there and not in the trash like they were the last time she unintentionally left them in an interview dressing room. She gave herself some credit because she was tired, had a really difficult day the day before, and was cancelled, even though it wasn't typical of her to be so disorganized. Once more. Since she was actually in the building just minutes before going live, it was even worse this time. Fortunately, she didn't encounter anyone until she arrived at the dressing room. Sue stepped back once she was through the doorway. Fortunately, her notes did not end up in the trash. Rather, they were not in the hands of the number 2 hero and her old UA classmate Bakugo Katsuki, who was reading them while seated in the chair she had occupied just moments before and wearing a very serious expression. For some reason, Sue felt a little taken by surprise right now. She had seen Katsuki since graduation, so it wasn't like that. Over the years, they continued to meet or at least see each other relatively frequently at social events like reunions, weddings, and other hero events that required attendance, even though they weren't each other's main support system during missions and other crises. The last time, if only because Izuku had been delayed by another crisis and the hospital was being attacked, was during the birth of Izuku and Ochako's first child. So, when the sea-green-haired woman saw the man sitting in the chair, wearing a very fashionable and fitted shirt that showed off how muscular his arms were, she shouldn't feel like she had entered a different dimension. The same hairdresser who had done Sue's hair half an hour earlier must have done his ash blonde hair, which was much shorter now than it had been when they were teenagers and looked almost effortlessly stylish. Before clearing her throat, she thought, he's always handsome, but he looks different now. Whatever odd feeling she had vanished when the red eyes that had been so intent on her notes shifted to her, and she was at peace when he nodded at her rather than saying hello and his eyebrows narrowed just enough to give him that classic Bakugo's resting bitch face expression. Even though she knew Katsuki must have been the reason for her rescheduling, she said, "Hello, Baku-chan," and gave him a genuine smile because she felt a little better now. The number 2 hero's busy schedule made it impossible to reach them, as was well known. He was nearly as busy as the number 1 hero, who had just become a father and had been out of the spotlight for more than a month due to dealing with villains. The producers had to seize their opportunity as soon as Katsuki became available. The ash blonde thumbed through the papers with her notes on her Kids at the Beach project and said, "I thought the handwriting was familiar." "Do you still remember my handwriting?" Sue asked, blinking and advancing. When the question was asked, she appeared surprised, but in reality, she wasn't. Katsuki was known for being a hothead with a foul mouth, but he was also very intelligent and analytical, and he never forgot what he thought was important. In his book, it just so happened that not many people or things about them were considered important. He handed the notes to her open palm and remarked, "I've never seen a girliest handwriting. Second only to Deku's." Before she put her notes in her bag, she went back and saw that Katsuki had actually reached the last page. "That's a weak jab, Kiro," Sue said with a bright smile and a brief look of closure. She thought he looked more at ease than she had seen him in a long time when she opened her eyes. Even though she didn't see him very often, she could see how tense Katsuki appeared all the time when she saw him sitting so comfortably, his forehead free of the wrinkles from frowning, and something that looked like a tiny smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. "As usual," she said bluntly, "you need a vacation, Baku-chan." The ash blonde turned to face her, his eyebrows immediately furrowing. "What the fuck are you talking about?" he yelled, not as angrily as he could, but it was obvious that he was offended. Sue thought aloud, "I'm not saying it to belittle you or anything," and touched her bottom lip. "It appears that you would benefit from some time to unwind. Now that I think about it, I could. You look exhausted." Katsuki ran over her with his red eyes before settling for her face, as if he had lost some of his fight. His laid-back demeanor did not return. Sue approached the mirror before his chair and took a quick look at her face. Even though they did her hair and makeup for the interview, it was insufficient to cover up the dark circles under her eyes and the lack of radiance brought on by extreme sleep deprivation. "I slept for only 4 hours. "Sad," said Katsuki, and as their gazes locked in the mirror, Sue grinned and said, "Obviously, coming from someone who considers his sleep sacred, you would say that. No amount of caffeine, vitamins, or sunlight can ever make up for 8 hours of sleep," he said sternly to her, "particularly in our profession." "I agree, but I didn't really have much of a choice," she said, nodding, and took another look at her notes, this time filled with sadness and disappointment at yet another opportunity lost after so much effort to make it happen. "Where are you going?" Sue pressed her back against the desk next to Katsuki and turned to face him when he asked, "Are you on vacation?" "Why? Would you like to accompany me?" Before pressing her finger against her lower lip once more and giving it some thought, she teased him, enjoying the irritated glance he gave her. "Somewhere warm with a nice ocean," she thought. "Following graduation, I spent 2 years in Europe. I have no problem going back there. The ocean where you work is lovely. For once, wouldn't it be nice to see something different? I would find it most relaxing to be close to water," he said, and Sue shrugged her shoulders. "I still have trouble with cold weather." "Still," scowled Katsuki. "What about your devices and suit? They can only do so much, but they do help. They're fine during battles, but I can't see them for a day or several, especially with the aftershock. A villain created his kingdom by freezing water a few months ago, and before I could even consider moving on my own, I was stranded in a warm bath for half the day. It was awful." Even now, recalling the event she would prefer to never go through again made her shiver. After that, her body was extremely rigid. Sue was shocked by how cruel it was, even though the support team her agency hired warned her that if she used her temperature regulators for too long, her body would suffer for a very long time when she turned them off. She shivered as tiny, icy needles pricked every part of her body, causing her to go into a state of unconscious consciousness rather than even sleep. "Asui," Katsuki said, and she blinked the memory out of her mind and went back to the present. "I don't do well in places with snow and ice. Perhaps a forest, if not a beach." Katsuki's red eyes seemed worried as he watched her frown. "It's okay now," she said, smiling and regaining her balance. "For a brief moment, I recalled it. Where do you want to go, then?" "Somewhere, where no one will bother me," he said, his face hardening for a moment as his eyes lost their worried expression and he once more gazed at the mirror, silently observing his reflection. She leaned closer to him out of instinct, but she restrained herself before she could touch him. When she blocked his view in the reflection, he was forced to look at her side. His expression softened slightly as he looked up into her face once more, thinking, a forest might be okay. Somewhere far away. "Kiro, with a lake?" "Yeah, with a fucking lake for you to soak all day long in," she asked in jest, taking pride in the fact that not even Bakugo Katsuki could contain his laughter. Realizing she was in a much better mood than she had been since arriving here, she smiled at him. Even though she wasn't as depressed about her interview as she had been, she still believed she couldn't stay. "We still have time to come up with ideas, though. Good luck on your interview," she said with another smile, genuinely meaning it when she said, "See you later." Katsuki's smile vanished, and he instantly straightened and crossed his arms, no longer resembling the easygoing, cheerful man he had been just a moment before. "You're going?" Although he sounded shocked and perplexed, Sue almost believed he was disappointed as well. "You also have an interview, don't you? So why are you here?" Despite the strong opinions of those who believed her face was expressionless, Sue took great pride in being transparent. It got rescheduled. She was probably so direct because she lacked facial expressions, allowing others to always know what was on her mind. Katsuki's usual frown grew deeper. "Why? It?" A producer, a pretty woman in her late 30s whom Sue had never met before, said cheerfully as she entered the dressing room, "Ah, Bakugo-san, we're almost ready for you." She seemed to be having trouble finding the right words before she finally asked, "Didn't someone come to inform you that there has been a change?" Her previously bright smile froze for a moment before falling, even if only slightly. "Oh, Asui-san. Yes, I just forgot something." "Kiro," Sue nodded, assuring the other woman, who seemed to prefer that Sue had already left. When the sea-green-haired heroine turned back to face Katsuki, she saw that his brows were furrowed and his eyes narrowed. "Goodbye, Baku. When do you have your interview?" Before she could say goodbye, Katsuki interrupted her once more with this question. Sue was a little perplexed. Did he choose to keep Sue around because he didn't want to be alone with this woman? As friendly as one could get with someone like the ash-blonde hero, Sue and Katsuki were on good terms. Since high school, he has made great progress and developed both mentally and physically. He improved at maintaining his composure, working in a team, and managing his emotions, but he was still noisy and occasionally she and others wished he could wash his mouth with a bar of soap. Despite how surprisingly simple it was to speak with Katsuki just a moment ago, she and he weren't exactly friends because they hadn't spent much time together after graduation. Although they were hardly friends or anything, they did greet each other at events and occasionally exchange a few sentences if they had the time and were in a group or there was no one else around like they had just a moment before. They didn't say, "Kiro," the sea-green-haired heroine said, turning to the producer, who appeared equally perplexed. "Well, I'm sure we can work something out and call you soon," she said, forcing her smile back on after it had fallen completely. "When?" Katsuki asked, glancing at the woman, who was now very irritated. Trying to think of a reason, the woman shrugged her shoulders and said, "Maybe next week. We'll definitely give you a call, Asui-san," she said, turning to face her as though she thought Sue would accept and finish with his. As casually as someone else would say good morning and get up, Katsuki said, "Fuck that. We're doing an interview together, Froggy," he said with the assurance for which he was renowned and which she frequently admired. "What are you talking about?" Sue asked, her eyes widening as she wondered if she had heard the man correctly. Then she blinked and saw that he had referred to her by the nickname he had given her in high school when he thought she was too unimportant to remember her name. As Katsuki approached her, towering over her and wearing a visibly agitated expression, the producer woman was rendered speechless. "Do you think we do this nonsense because we like it?" she asked. After a moment of silence, the woman shook her head rapidly and repeatedly, likely realizing that it was the appropriate thing to do. "We don't have time for you to string us along," Katsuki said, pausing between words to emphasize the importance of the statement. "We're professional heroes. Froggy is prepared and already here. We can divide up our time." "Can we even do that, Kiro?" the producer asked, turning to face Sue, who then turned to face Katsuki. "Sure, why the fuck not?" He nodded. As Sue grinned, he pushed his hands into his pockets and said, "Your project deserves to be heard, and this is a good place to start." Even though Katsuki's attempt was unsuccessful, she was incredibly appreciative of it, now more than ever. The producer began, "But, I don't think our boss will approve. All of his questions are already prepared, and..." "Then he must have had questions prepared for my interview as well," Sue said, glancing at the woman. "Kiro, you just cancelled 20 minutes ago." "Look, I'll make it really fucking simple for you people," Katsuki said again after the producer appeared to be fending off some retort. "Your host has 1 hour. He can either divide it between us or have me spend the first half hour answering his questions and then spend the next half hour sitting on his opulent couch and not saying a word." But you can't," the woman said, looking horrified. Have you seen the shit I pulled on other interviews? Katsuki asked, crossing his arms in a clearly menacing manner. Before she hurried out, the woman glanced from Katsuki to Sue. Katsuki went back to his seat and threw himself into it, leaving Sue to gather her thoughts about what had happened in silence. Her dark eyes swept over Katsuki's face and body, observing how much of his previous fighting had subsided now that he was free of the producer's wrath. Baku-chan, that's what you did was. Sue opened her mouth, not knowing what she was going to say or how. It's nothing, he said, shrugging his shoulder as though to convey that it wasn't a significant issue at all. Sue gave the man a bright smile, feeling a certain warmth in her chest due to the familiarity of the situation and the ease with which Katsuki could still act after all these years when he did something kind. Then she took a step toward him and touched his shoulder. Sue knew that a shoulder squeeze would be safe, but Katsuki didn't like it when people touched him or anything. Thank you. When he said, your idea is good, Froggy, red eyes met hers, and she felt even more at ease and at ease. In their free time, you want children from high-risk communities to participate in beach cleanup initiatives. That's an excellent idea. It is worthy of being heard. You are worthy of being heard. Even though the corners of his lips did not move, she could tell by the slight change behind his eyes that he became tender, even if only briefly, as her smile widened. The producer reappeared a moment later and, with a considerably less enthusiastic tone and demeanor, told them that they could share the interview shortly. When Katsuki heard that, she got back up and walked toward the door, Sue following, still in the happiest mood of the day. So far, the interview had been going fairly smoothly. Instead of concentrating on one person for the entire 30 minutes, the host kind of moved between the two of them. Katsuki behaved well in spite of his reputation and actions, smirking at some of Sue's UA stories rather than exploding over her blatant taunting and only hurling a few F-bombs that the host promised would not be heard. Since he hadn't raised any questions yet, it was only disheartening that it appeared they hadn't done much planning for her kids at the beach project. Katsuki even gave her a laugh and shook his head when the host started laughing again, asking, "Are you done busting my balls over there?" "It's good for you, but I'll stop," she said, laughing and turning to face him, wishing she could always do interviews with someone else because it felt so much more relaxed and comfortable than ever when she was forced onto the stage alone. Before they both turned to face the host, who had just finished laughing, he gave her an "I don't fucking believe you" look and she gave him a little tongue out. "I have to say," he said, "you two have a great relationship." Sue and Katsuki exchanged another glance, but she could tell that even though the atmosphere was lighthearted, Katsuki wasn't happy that the host had made a remark about their relationship. Sue always took pride in being a laid-back individual who made friends everywhere she went, but previously, she and Katsuki weren't very close. She was also taken aback by the easygoing atmosphere they created less than an hour ago through light conversation in the dressing room, and she began to question whether she should make a greater effort going forward to maintain contact with the ash blonde. The host returned her focus to him and said, "I'm glad you're in such a good mood. Perhaps there is someone new in your life. Who's keeping you in such a good mood?" "Actually, the reason I'm in a good mood is a project I was hoping to talk about today," Sue said, avoiding the annoyance that would have been expected of her in any other situation, as she was certain that everyone was when they received the question. "Children at the beach." "Ah, you single ladies with your projects," the host joked, taking the heroine by surprise before she could continue. "It's something my agency has been working on for a while. Your agency recently had a photo shoot for a popular magazine," the host, who was now overly intrigued, said. He said, "The agency does a lot of activities. Which one do you mean?" Sue blinked, wondering if she was missing a joke or punchline. She asked thoughtfully. Since she was preoccupied with her beach project and her hero work, she was certain that there had not been a recent photo shoot. He smiled at her and said, "Oh, I'm sure you know which one I mean." Sue felt a little uneasy, and her discomfort only grew when he added, "It's your most famous one." When he said that, she realized he was talking about a picture from 4 years ago, and she lost any hope that this would work out for her. She was much younger and wore a highly provocative swimsuit for a fashion brand that backed her career, which is why she was so popular even today. Oh, and the swimsuit's material clung to her body like a second skin because she was so soaked, making it even hotter. Though she owned it, was proud of her body, the swimsuit, and the brand, and had a lot of support from her family, friends, and fans, Sue was never as talked about as she was after the photo was released. Despite this, she occasionally felt self-conscious about it. In particular, when people pulled it up, they sounded and looked just like the host. With a smile and a slightly dreamy expression on his face, the host said, "I'm sure if you did another one like that you would gain far more publicity for your project. Trust me, You would make more than just the kids happy. Sue knew better than to ever give such men, villains or not, the satisfaction of knowing they had some control over her emotions, so she refrained from expressing how disgusted she was by the man. Instead of thinking of what to say, she stared at him blankly until she heard a crack next to her. The fuck did you just say to she? Sue turned to face Katsuki, who had, now that she thought about it, been suspiciously quiet the entire time this awkward conversation began. She could tell what the crack must have been by the way he was clenching his fists on his knees. The ash blonde's demon-like expression splashed across his face, making it clear how angry he was, even without his white clenched fists and his icy tone of voice. Bakugo-san, the host began nervously, laughing. It was just a joke. Do you think we're both laughing? The man flinched as Katsuki yelled at him. Tell her that again. I dare you, fuck. The host appeared frightened, and Sue didn't blame him. However, when he continued to look back at her as if he expected her to interrupt and mediate some sort of peace or dismiss his remark as a joke, as she usually did to avoid upsetting anyone, she couldn't find the strength to do so. Throughout her professional career, she has had to deal with remarks like that, so perhaps for tonight, she was okay with Katsuki or anyone else standing up for her instead of just giving her the awkward look of sympathy that most of her male coworkers have given her thus far. All right. Katsuki, who was by her side and was still acting very aggressively, almost made her smile. I don't have all day, she said, but before she could do so, she caught herself in the act. The host's attempt at a fake, high-pitched laugh and his feeble, sorry, probably indicate that he finally realized she wouldn't be playing this game tonight. Not good enough, Katsuki said, and Sue nearly felt sorry for the host when he threw her a beseeching glance, but not enough to break and speak. I sincerely apologize, the host said, clearing his throat and raising his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. That wasn't tasteful. While Katsuki crossed his arms and muttered, a little less angrily now, but with the unmistakable message, don't say shit like that ever again, Sue simply nodded and refused to accept his apology aloud. Even though neither of them spoke, a certain understanding passed between them when Sue looked at him and he looked back at her. The host then had enough grace to at least attempt to salvage the interview by asking her about her project, but it was clear that he had lost any chance Katsuki was willing to give him because number 2 hero's subsequent responses were brief and antagonistic. After saying their goodbyes with a grunt, Sue and Katsuki walked out of the building together. A tiny but distinct sigh of relief and exhaustion escaped their lips as soon as they were out into the street. Katsuki brushed his face and said, "Thank the fuck." Sue nodded, feeling as though a burden had been removed from her shoulders. Yeah. She was relieved that the long day was coming to an end. The two began to walk toward the parking lot where she had left her car, with nothing more to say. There were still enough people moving through the streets, even though it was getting dark. After a while, Sue said, "Baku-chan," feeling that it was easier to say aloud, "Thank you for standing up for me," now that she was outside and not in that awful talk show building. She kept an eye on him to make sure he could feel her gaze and turned to face her. Sue was aware of Katsuki's discomfort with such things, even though they weren't close, but she wouldn't accept it, so he was out of luck. Tonight, he did too much for her. More than some of her family members and close friends had done in a long time. They weren't to blame. It felt great to have someone by her side, even though she was also busy and had been feeling a little excluded lately. Particularly, someone who, although Sue knew she couldn't say it aloud, didn't mind biting the heads off of others. In private, she could admire this. I mean it, Sue said, stepping in front of the ash blonde as he shrugged and attempted to turn away. She tried to say, "Thank you for the backup," but was unsure of how to phrase it. It felt great to have someone else fight for me tonight, even though I don't mind fighting my own battles. After blinking, Katsuki turned to face her. She didn't know what he was searching for, but she could tell that her apology had eased some of his discomfort. You won't say anything about how uncouth and unheroic I was? Playing with the work in an unheroic way, as if it were intended to be ridiculed, he asked. Sue stopped and shook her head, making him follow suit. Never. Sometimes, I truly envy you to be able to say such things, she said, pressing her finger against her lower lip. Not only that you can, but you can get away with them, she said, averting her gaze. You see, being a heroine makes everything stick with you. The good and the bad, Kiro, she said, primarily referring to her role as the person who helped those in need. Her relatives. Her companions. Her peers. Her co-workers. Her admirers. However, the fact that the old swimsuit photo was also true irritated her. If you're talking about him, she asked, feeling movement as Katsuki looked down at her and put his hands in his pockets. Screw that man. According to the producer bitch's behavior, he is a tool and obviously hires tools as well. As for your mediator shit, she began, but Katsuki shrugged his shoulders. Believe me, I also remember things. Anticipating my agency's response tomorrow. I only came tonight because everyone was trying to be nice to me. Why didn't Sue like the sound of that? If anything, she said bluntly, you're much better than you were in UA, and everyone had a crush on you then. Katsuki narrowed his eyes at her, saying, "Oi." It's true, she said, giving him a small smile to let him know she wasn't being cruel. She didn't believe it was her remark, I'm stuck, but he still appeared upset. Sue didn't sense any resentment in Katsuki's statement, can't beat Deku. Admitting that his rival was superior to him couldn't be simple, though, and he was powerless to stop him. I'm getting closer to other losers. I would much rather stab myself in the eye every time than engage in more of that crap, and I'm too damn busy to go to all this media bullshit. Furthermore, when he said, I doubt they'll do shit in my favor, he appeared appropriately enraged, not as though he was going to blow up, but as though he truly felt hate. The violence, rudeness, angry outbursts, and bad boy image are all fucking there, and I won't pretend that it's not at least partially true. As she listened to his sincere desire to assist him, she felt a little out of her element. Perhaps, but tonight's viewers saw that Bakugo Katsuki, bad boy or not, is a decent man who defends women and his co-workers. Thank you, Baku-chan, once more, for standing up for me and my cause, she said, reaching out and lightly touching his arm with her lower fingers, touching his bare skin. That's the kind of hero people like to see, Kiro. Even though he glanced back at her face quickly, Katsuki's red eyes briefly lingered on her hand on him. His face became smooth and devoid of his usual frown as his eyebrows straightened. After a brief moment together, Sue realized she was holding him for too long and released him. She didn't intend to do it, but strangely, after she touched him, it felt right to continue. What a strange thing about Bakugo Katsuki. She felt somewhat self-conscious around the man after her hand returned to her side, and her stomach was tense. Maybe from now on, she should express her gratitude while reducing the number of gentle touches. Around Katsuki, anyway. It wasn't like you left me with any choice, Froggy, he said, and something akin to amusement and mischief sparked behind his red eyes. When you stand up for yourself, you're only this tall, he said, taking one of his hands idly out of his pocket and lifting it just above her head to emphasize how much shorter Sue was than him. She was surprised, if only slightly, to see the corner of his mouth lift as it had during the interview, but without the host or camera to amuse them. The sea green heroine actually threw back her head and laughed, saying, I can't believe you said that, after watching the man in amazement at his joke and feeling a rush of laughter and happiness. She was still grinning when she felt the last of the tension from earlier, and the negative attitude from today vanished in an instant. Who would have guessed that Bakugo Katsuki could lift someone's spirits so effectively? Kiro, don't be so arrogant about me just yet. Can I invite you somewhere? She asked as they resumed their walk until they arrived at her car. You were a huge help to me tonight. Baku-chan, I feel like I owe you. I can't, she said, having to roll down the window after Katsuki closed her door for her. Tonight, I'll be on call. I'm being picked up by Kirishima from the entrance so I can go back to the agency and wait. She was taken aback because he didn't have to walk her to her car or shut her door for her. She was left feeling both awed and appreciative of the man. She had the impression that she had spent all of her time with Katsuki tonight, but it appeared that he had more kind things planned. You're a really good person, Katsuki, she said with a small smile. Everyone is blind if they are unable to see that. She saw that he flinched so badly, but she kept smiling at him, so he would appropriately give himself time to process what she had said. Still looking uncertain, he averted his gaze for a second before saying, much more subtly than usual, drive safe, Froggy. Good night, Baku-chan, said Sue, gesturing with the tip of her tongue that she could take care of herself. I appreciate you being my hero this evening. Before Katsuki hurried off, Sue would have sworn she saw a slight flush cross his cheeks, even if it had just been the dim street lamp light. She was certain that she saw the ash blonde waiting by the sidewalk to make sure she drove away before he turned back to walk toward the building once she got the car started and left the parking lot. This made her smile all the way to her place. With seemingly endless patience, the male voice on the other end of Katsuki's phone call began, Bakugo-san, causing the ash blonde hero to become extremely irritated ever since he hired the man nearly 2 years prior. I'm afraid there is only so much I can do to help you if you don't cooperate at least a little bit, the voice said. Katsuki would have told them to go die long ago if it had been anyone else. The 40-something man who handled Bakugo Katsuki's agency public relations and other image issues, unfortunately for the number 2 hero at least, reminded the ash blonde too much of his own quiet father for him to let loose his rage on him. In addition, he was simply too skilled at his work. Oh no. In order to avoid saying something too hurtful for someone like his publicist, the ash blonde took a deep breath and attempted to end the call. He already had a suspicion that the weak man occasionally sobbed in his car when he was too hard on him, which was even more annoying because Katsuki actually made an effort to be less cruel to the man than he was to some others. Okay, he grunted, fuck me for getting this soft, I'll find the time, I have to leave. The same old issue that has plagued Katsuki for a number of years kept coming up. It was simple to reach the top 10. It's almost comical. Katsuki and the nation knew that he was a goddamn good hero, so he didn't need to be or was modest. But the issues began when he was able to place on number 8 only 2 years after graduating. Everyone who got there was good, so it didn't matter how good he was. Strong, decent, and most importantly, liked, but not superior to him. Ever since he was a brat in middle school and the infamous sludge villain incident occurred, Katsuki has changed his life and worked tirelessly to become the best. He merited it. Hard work, sacrifice, and dedication earned him everything he had, but at the top, no matter how good he was or how much he gave up, he was still unable to fulfill his dream of becoming the number 1 hero. When he was younger, he always intended to suppress All Might and thought that if he worked harder, he would defeat Deku. However, a little more than a year ago, the ash blonde realized that Deku's one-for-all quirk was the reason he wasn't at the top. Being the most popular hero in the nation put him at the top. People adored a hero like Deku because he was good and strong, but he was also cheerful and bright. Every flaw that people had previously disregarded in favor of Katsuki's vicious strength and self-assurance when he was younger was now his greatest strength, leaving the ash blonde in second place. All of them. Oh no time. It really was that easy. What about Katsuki? He would always be the second best, just as good and strong, but still a foul-mouthed bad boy who couldn't live up to the camera's demands and would much rather beat up villains than respond to yet another question about his romantic life. Oh, I see. I had no idea you were on call this evening. The older man wished him, stay safe, and even though Katsuki couldn't see him, he could still visualize his fatherly grin, which caused the younger man to roll his eyes at him. This week, I should probably give my old man a call. Without bothering to respond, the ash blonde just hung up the phone and turned to look at the lovely suburban home before him. In actuality, Katsuki wasn't available tonight. He foolishly admitted that he had a day off tonight after being betrayed in a vulnerable moment while leaving a difficult mission with a busted shoulder. Deku pounced on it right away and invited him to come over and talk. Even though the ash blonde was already feeling his own patience slipping from his fingers, I'll fucking beat Deku's ass in front of it if it's going to be one of his bullshit lectures about maintaining the hero image clean, kid or not. Days off weren't something Katsuki did, primarily because he detested having to spend time on interviews and other phony media nonsense, even though he desperately needed the publicity and positive press. He did, however, occasionally get a break and was able to conceal it from his publicist, avoiding any appearances. He enjoyed doing his own shit and being fucking alone. Cook, go hiking, or watch a movie. He didn't enjoy going to the home of his rival and his new, swoon-worthy family. Why in hell do I have to see the fucking child again when I saw him at birth? Since there was no use in going back now, Katsuki finally just sighed deeply and moved toward the house. The house was clearly new, and like most of the homes in the area, it was comfortable and homey rather than overly modern or futuristic. The ash blonde hero wasn't particularly shocked. Since Katsuki recalled Deku as a child ogling his parents' backyard and roof window when he used to visit to play, he reasoned that the nerd had always claimed to like my house. Those memories seemed almost unreal, as if they had occurred in a different lifetime and to a different person, even after mandatory hero therapy and anger management. Katsuki didn't even recognize the person. He checked his surroundings casually and pressed the doorbell on the gate. It was difficult to break the habits that had been ingrained in him since he joined the UA, even if he wasn't on duty tonight. He saw a dark green car on the opposite side of the street just as the buzzer opened the gate. He recalled walking her up to her car all those months ago and thought it was kind of funny that she still made it a habit to own green things at 30 years old. Froggy thought that she had the same model and color. She frequently had to wear at least one item of apparel or accessory in her favorite color, green. Back in UA, he remembered. He thought he was good at being completely ignorant of his classmates back then, so it was strange how many useless things he occasionally remembered about them. Katsuki couldn't help but think of the sea-green-haired heroine he had met by chance a few months prior as he approached the main door, where Midoriya Ochako was already waiting for him. The memory of the interview and that piece of shit host made him clench his fists in his pockets and narrow his eyes despite himself. That night, Katsuki was so angry that he was unable to respond appropriately to the fucker's subsequent questions about how he had treated Tsuyu because he knew that if he did, he would likely tell him something even worse than what he had already done. When Froggy drove away that night, Katsuki grabbed his phone and spoke with his publicist for a long time, telling him that he would never again want to work with that host or his show and that anyone from his agency who even mentioned the host's name would be fired immediately. Although he made an effort to control his temper, Katsuki was a hothead by nature and was impolite and noisy. He attributed that to his old hag, but he had to acknowledge that it had been a long time since he had become so irritated, particularly over someone else's issue. He later pondered whether it was because he was actually enjoying an interview with Tsuyu by his side for the first time in a long time. It was strange but pleasant, and he was thoroughly enjoying the lighthearted banter, when that jerk ruined the whole evening for him. Nearly. Whoa, who made you angry? When he eventually reached the main door, he asked the woman with the brown hair, and she gave him permission to enter the house. When he saw a pair of women's sandals in the hallways, he kicked off his shoes. As Katsuki placed his shoes next to the pair and put on the guest shoes that were ready for him, he thought, those can't be cheeks. I'm fine, he said, trying not to sound angry, but it still sounded like a grunt. Ochako made him explain at least a little bit by raising her eyebrows at him. To get this over with, he half lied and said, works shit. Like hell. He was telling Deku's wife that he was still upset with that pointless host and that he was having issues with his reputation and career months later. Fortunately, she didn't press the issue and appeared to accept it as she gestured for him to follow her down the corridor. Even the interior of the house was lovely, brand new, and incredibly comfortable and familial. Katsuki remembered the first time he had seen Deku and Ochako since the crisis began, when he finally made it to the hospital after his son was born. Hero cleaning began hours after the birth, and many heroes, including Katsuki, stayed to assist even though they were not required to. At one point, he was able to turn to see Ochako on the bed with the infant, and Deku kneeling beneath the bed, observing them as closely as he could without touching them because he was still quite filthy and all. Katsuki's first thought was of a real family, and he couldn't help but think the same thing when he saw the house. They reside in a lovely family home and are a true family. I hear Yagi-san calling. He took a vacation to Africa with Midoriya-san. Would you mind a short wait? Before he could chastise her and her husband for inviting him in the first place while they were busy, Ochako led him into a living room, and Katsuki's thoughts ceased to exist except for fuck me. He gave her a glare on the back of her head. Katsuki hoped Kami couldn't read minds, but Asui Tsuyu looked up from the baby she was holding against her chest and gave it a rattle, saying, Baku-chan. Hello, almost as if she heard him. While he was trying to process meeting Froggy like this again, on this day of all days, his red eyes blinked, barely catching anything Cheeks said before she left the living room, probably to go talk to Deku's mother and All Might. She was on the carpet with the baby when the hero nodded to her as the shock set in, making her feel a little uncomfortable. Is this some sort of setup? She asked. Before she laughed and asked, somewhat surprised by her tone, a what? Tsuyu's dark, expressionless eyes blinked twice, and he wondered if she was now aware of this as well. Katsuki felt foolish for implying that, and he hoped his face wouldn't turn red. In the first place, he wasn't even sure why he asked. It wasn't as if he ever imagined Deku or his wife would do such a thing, and with someone like Froggy of all people. I mean, who was stupid enough to try to set me up like this? When he finally arrived to pick him up the night of the notorious interview, Kirishima did try to make light of him in the car, but Katsuki quickly put an end to that, and no one ever mentioned it again. He and Tsuyu used to be co-workers and classmates. He enjoyed the fact that they didn't see each other often enough to be considered friends, much less anything more. Nothing, he said, attempting to regain his composure by rubbing his chin with one hand. Tsuyu nodded at the area on the carpet in front of her where there was no toy or other baby object, half of which Katsuki didn't know what it was for, and said, You know you can come closer, Kiro. I'm fine, he told her, but why are you here? The young woman was still grinning when he turned to look at her, which led him to believe that she was teasing him a little before responding. I came to see Nagi-chan. She explained, I was busy these past few weeks, and then she turned back to the infant, speaking in that gratingly high voice that everyone seemed to use around infants. Isn't that right? She asked. It seems like you haven't seen Aunt Sue in a long time. Before he could stop himself, Katsuki laughed, and Froggy looked up at him. She wasn't offended because she was grinning, but he could tell by the tone she used that she was challenging him to make fun of her. What? Who am I to let her down? What is he, 8 months? He doesn't even know where his nose is, let alone who are you, said Katsuki after doing a quick calculation. As Froggy repositioned the baby against her side, he stepped closer. True, but I still think it counts if he hears my voice and sees me, Katsuki said. You do realize that I'm very different, Nagi-chan? The sea-green-haired heroine rewarded the baby with a kiss on his forehead after he turned his large greenish eyes toward her and gave her a shaky smile. When Katsuki saw it, his smirk dipped a little. The gesture nearly astounded him as Froggy's appearance today. He spent the majority of his kindergarten years trying to get his relatives to stop trying to get their saliva on his face, so it wasn't like he didn't know people did that, and there was nothing wrong with the little forehead kiss, but for some reason, the ash-blonde hero felt a little too close to Tsuyu and the baby right then. Pure. For someone like him, who couldn't watch for more than a minute without yelling at something or losing his temper, it simply felt too pure. He cleared his throat and looked away, wondering why she had upset him so much today. Whatever, he said. She said, I've never heard back from you, Kiro, and there was a tinge of disappointment, even if it was only in his imagination. Your agency wasn't too harsh on you, was it? Tsuyu said abruptly, turning his attention back to her and the infant, who now took the toy from her other hand and began shaking it to create a tuneless melody. Katsuki suddenly forgot about his discomfort and felt at ease once more. He anticipated some negative reaction after the interview. He was too fucking angry to care that he was acting in such an unprofessional manner toward a host, and his only regret is that he didn't fucking go full UA-era Bakugo on that fucker's ass right then and there. However, the interview brought Katsuki some positive press, just as Tsuyu had predicted, much to his and his publicist's surprise. Many positive comments were left by people, mostly women, praising his actions and the way he swiftly shut down the host to defend his female colleague. Even though he technically threatened the man, he received some credit for not going all out on him as everyone had anticipated. Although it only lasted a few weeks, it significantly improved his mood. Particularly after a few other heroes with Froppy on top of them continued to spread the word by sharing pictures and brief videos from the interview. No, I don't believe I've ever witnessed him so joyful. Even though he made an effort to hide it, the man started crying a little after I told him that I detested when people act that way around me. He said, somewhat irritated that it caused Tsuyu to throw back her head and laugh aloud. Between him, my dad, and Deku, I can't catch a fucking break with these crybaby men around me. When she did, the infant turned to face her and began to grimace as well, leading Katsuki to believe that a picture of the two would be pleasant. Listen, kid, Nagi said, turning to Katsuki as best he could and shaking his toy as if he were showing it to him. I hope you'll be a tough boy like your mom, and not a crybaby like your fuck, he said until Tsuyu's hand shot up and went to cover his mouth, but he caught her wrist before it reached his face. The corner of his mouth twisted into a smirk, feeling strangely happy that he had gotten such a reaction from her. It was an instinct. Katsuki detested being touched by others. He was only able to maintain contact during fights or when he touched other people, but lately he was becoming less interested in the latter. Tsuyu was strangely cautious and gentle with him on the night of the interview. Her touch was friendly and even helpful, but not in a way that made him feel like she was mocking him. Instead, it felt like she was caving into his needs. Baku-chan, you can't say those words in a house with a child, she said, her mouth still pulled into a big, amused smile that told everyone exactly what she was thinking. If her son says that as his first word, Ocha-chan will kill you. Katsuki carefully unwrapped his fingers from her skin, glad that his reaction had not caused any awkwardness. The way her wide fingers made her palms and feet so big was almost cute, but the rest of her body was so tiny compared to his. She didn't require the bulk that he and the other heroes had because she was a swimmer and was strong in the water, but it still made him feel oddly lovable when she stood beside him, her head barely touching his shoulder. I can take her, he said, echoing Tsuyu's earlier remark. No one can take a mother when you piss upset her, she said, raising her eyebrows at him despite her inability to look at him. He sat down across from her and remarked, geez, it's like kindergarten all over again. He was positive that he had told her he didn't want to come and sit down, so he had to watch what he said. You should always watch your mouth, Baku-chan, Froggy said, beaming at him before turning back to Nagi and running her fingers through the young boy's green, curly hair. No, my mouth is what I'm most famous for, he said, fearing once more that he had crossed some imaginary line and that his image as a woman's advocate would be destroyed. Tsuyu just shook her head and laughed, saying, You're mostly famous because you're the number 2 hero. Don't minimize your achievements. Kiro, I won't have it. Her genuine voice and kind words caused the ash-blonde hero to feel the corner of his lips begging to be drawn into a smile. It felt great when Asui Tsuyu took over, even though he didn't really ask for a fucking cheerleader. He didn't give it much thought, but if her words had such a positive impact on his self-esteem, he must have secretly held this woman in high regard. There were moments when even Katsuki began to grow weary of it all, but he gave back as much as he received. He wasn't just loud, easily agitated, and a swearer, no matter who could hear. Having someone else acknowledge it felt good. When Tsuyu completed it, it felt good. Would you like to hold him for a while? When she asked, he abruptly dropped the corner of his mouth and said, no. Why not? I'll drop him and have Deku and cheeks on my ass, she asked, nuzzling the contented infant that was now observing him with interest as though it could comprehend what he was saying. Baku-chan. I don't want to be killed by one for all, he said, looking at the infant once more. Ass is not a bad word, Froggy, chill. You're missing out, Tsuyu said with a sigh, drawing the infant closer to her face. The best smell is that of a baby. Hard pass, he said, but his red eyes followed her nose movements as she inhaled Naji's head. It's probably a myth, he said. She seemed to be making a point when she said, you'll never know if you don't try it, Kiro, but then something changed, and she recoiled slightly and sat up to her knees, saying, hey, are you carrying your phone? With sudden excitement, she asked. As the sea green-haired heroine explained, my needs an upgrade, the ash blonde took his phone out of his pocket and realized too late that he should have been more wary of what she wanted. The right corner of the pictures is devoid of color. Would you please snap a photo of us and email it to me? Nagi-chan. My last photo was taken when you were unable to sit by yourself. I'd like a fresh one before you begin walking. Sure, said Katsuki with a sly smile. As Tsuyu smiled brightly and tickled the baby's barefoot until it began to beam and toss around a little, he pointed and took 3 pictures. Look into this corner, he said. At one point, he saw both Nagi and Tsuyu smiling as they gazed at him, and he thought, damn, that's not half bad. They appeared very content and at ease. They looked adorable together, like a real mother and her child, and oddly, Katsuki felt something change inside of her. Something he was unable to identify or describe. Would you like to join us? Nope, Tsuyu said, interrupting his thought process and causing him to shake his head instantly. Why? Kiro, it will be pleasant. No way, Katsuki repeated. Although he sounded stern, he wasn't really that irritated. Asui Tsuyu was a pleasant companion. Her presence never really bothered him, and oddly, it was exactly as it had been when they met by chance for that interview a few months ago. They now appeared to have a good chemistry and dynamic, which is uncommon for the loud-mouthed hero these days, even though he works hard to better himself. Individuals may be bothersome. They either fully hated him now and didn't bother hiding it at all, or they feared him despite their best efforts to hide it because they expected him to be a jerk. Simply put, people had a tendency to anticipate that he would act in a particular manner or create particular issues. It seemed as though he could act however he pleased with Tsuyu. He would still be given the benefit of the doubt for the next time, even if he was furious. With a smile that he could only characterize as mischievous, she began, come on now, Kiro. Don't you want to sit down with Izu-chan's son one day and tell him, do you know I saw you even before your own father did? She asked. She inquired about how, in a crisis, he, she, and a few other heroes were tasked with securing the hospital while Deku had to repel the powerful individuals half the city away. They went to check on the soon-to-be mother and saw the screaming, squishy baby through the window after defeating the villains and restoring power. I will serve as your witness. Katsuki's positive attitude improved when she smiled and said, Izu-chan already had Ocha-chan promise to never talk about it again, but I stayed quiet, so he doesn't know I was there too. And I won't say a thing about how pale you got when you saw him, Kiro, he said, because he couldn't fight it even if he wanted to. As he caught himself, he said, the little bast baby was covered in blood and placenta and whatnot. As Tsuyu began to giggle, Katsuki looked at the unaware infant and said, I thought you would be cleaned by then. He was amazed. Katsuki was affected in some way by seeing the young woman with the baby. He didn't really notice or pay attention to it at first because it was so subtle, but now that she was laughing and smiling at the baby, who appeared to be just as content and joyful, he couldn't help but feel a strange warmth come into his chest. Because his career was stagnating and there was no improvement or at least no plan on how to get out of second place, he had been dealing with a lot of stress and disappointment lately. It was almost therapeutic to see Tsuyu in this state, and he didn't mind at all that it took place in his fiercest rival's house. He smirked in spite of himself and said, all too resignedly, fine. Damn her and her seductive ways. Yay. Did you hear that, little one? Tsuyu, ecstatic at his choice, leaned toward Nagi's ear and whispered loudly enough for Katsuki to hear. We could sell it for good money, you know, she said, smiling into his eyes as she said, one of the flashiest heroes, Dynamite, will take a picture with us, Kiro. You sure like playing people to get what you want, don't you? He said, squinting his eyes at her but unable to suppress the smirk. Baku-chan, I don't know what you're talking about. Please move to this side now so that Nagi-chan is between us. She asked in such a sweet way that he nearly believed her. He rolled his eyes, but before he sat down beside her with the baby still in Tsuyu's arms, he gave her credit for teaching him how to do it expertly. Seeing that there was a big space between them, he turned his camera to the front one. Baku-chan, the sea green-haired woman said, looking at him and raising her eyebrows. Whatever, Froggy, fuck off, he yelled, stepped forward, and then put his shoulder against her smaller one. He was taller than her, even though she was kneeling and he was sitting, so he had to keep grinning and saying, so short. I didn't need to grow taller, I was already perfect at this height, Tsuyu said with a chuckle. Just as he smelled something flowery, he said dryly, lucky. It must be her body lotion or shampoo, he thought, savoring the calming scent that sent a calm wave through his senses. It seemed as though this woman was meant to support and soothe others because of how calm and soothing she was in every way. Don't leave any body fluids on me, little guy, or I'll have your aunt here. Wash it, Nagi said, reaching out and grabbing his jacket while shoving his toy into his mouth, getting it completely wet. He felt like returning the smile, but Tsuyu reassured him, I'll risk it, and if you put on some expression other than a scowl, I'll even iron it for you. After taking 2 photos and chuckling as he tried to remember when he had been feeling so good, Katsuki turned to her and said, you'll leave me a piece of chocolate there too? She turned to face him as he accidentally took another shot and said, no, you hate sweets, sounding proud that she knew this about him. Nagi began to wriggle and pat his chest, using his distraction as an opportunity. Asui smiled at him, obviously pleased with the development, and said, I think he wants to try Uncle Katsuki's arms too. Katsuki stifled his excitement and furrowed his brows, saying, doubt that. In my life, I never held one. I'm probably less than skilled, he said, pausing to avoid using the derogatory term. She leaned slightly closer to him and reassured him, it's not rocket science, and he's not that lil and fragile anymore. Katsuki's senses were completely overwhelmed in the best way by the wave of whatever flowery product she was using. Please, Uncle Katsu, I'm only ever held by my daddy, and I think you're even a little bit taller, she said, lowering her voice to that childlike low. I am taller, he couldn't help but yell, but not as loudly as he could have before. He sighed, defeated but still irritated, and raised his arms, wondering how she had managed to get him to get on the carpet, refrain from swearing, take pictures, and now hold the baby when he repeatedly and specifically refused to do all of those things. You're evil, he said without hesitation after she placed the Midoriya baby in his arms. You are utilizing some strange mental tricks for your own evil purposes. She smiled and snapped a photo of him. He didn't know how the woman got his phone without him noticing, but it must have happened while he was worrying about hitting Deku's child in the head. Because it was so light and tiny, he reminded himself that he was still holding him while attempting to keep his grip from crushing him too much. The baby instantly clung to him and gazed at him with the purest wonder, which made the hero laugh before he could stop himself. It's not that bad. Together with the child, Katsuki got to his feet and gingerly raised him above his head, causing him to briefly pretend to fly. This caused Nagi to make a number of happy noises, including, see kid. I am significantly taller than your elderly man. He put Nagi back in his arms and looked down at Asui, who was grinning at them from the carpet. He was reminded of how comfortable everything was. He felt happier and more at ease than he had in a long time. His heroic endeavors and his troubles appeared so distant, as if they were in a different city. The more he considered it, the more he had to concede that it was most likely the night of the interview because, prior to that host and his inappropriate behavior, Tsuyu and he were reminiscing and discussing hypothetical vacations, and it felt great. He couldn't remember the last time he had smirked so much and was truly amused. I felt even better today. Kirishima and everyone else tended to talk about work, which reminded him of the emotions he had been having trouble with recently. On his day off, he was entertaining Deku's child as if they were his personal babysitters and conversing with Tsuyu as if they were old friends. He thought, this is nice, and he sat down again, putting the baby back in Tsuyu's arms. He was a little amazed at how simple it was, not just because the baby weighed almost nothing. She grinned and said, "Happy you defeated your rival once more?" as the dark eyes found him. "Damn." They both laughed. "Do you intend to defeat him in this as well?" she asked, lifting Nagi slightly as he began to make little noises, as if he were speaking in his baby voice. Tsuyu's snatchy hands began to reach for other toys, and he began to pick them up and present them to Nagi until he selected one. For a moment, Katsuki's eyes observed him, noticing how much he resembled his mother, with the exception of his father's hair color, freckles, and possibly eye color. "I guess. I must have at least 2 brats if he only plans one." "What if they have 2? Tsuyu thought, pressing the index finger of her free hand against her lower lip as she occasionally did. Katsuki paused to ensure he wouldn't say something inappropriate before settling for, "Choke on his milk, for all I care. Then I'll have Fu 4, and he can." When the ash blonde laughed so brightly once more, she felt proud. It was starting to sound melodic. "I guess if your lady won't mind, Kiro," she said, moving the infant to her other arm and wiping Nagi's face once more. "Oh my god, what was that?" Katsuki mockingly asked. "I didn't want to ask that annoying question every hero gets asked all the time, and it came out funny anyway." Asui closed her eyes and slightly twisted her lips, but she didn't grimace at the word's correct definition. He rolled his eyes in sympathy for her lackluster interviewing skills and said, "Okay, and no, there's no lady right now, but I'll make sure to find one who gets my rivalry with Deku, Froggy." He didn't think that was necessary because his romantic life wasn't as glamorous as the media liked to portray it. He disliked socializing with strangers and preferred working. In addition, he appeared to only attract a particular kind of woman due to his behavior, and even though he liked such things, they eventually grew stale. There were occasionally one-time hookups because repeated encounters typically led to clinginess and feelings he didn't return, but aside from the instant release, they left him feeling empty, so he also reduced those. His focus returned to the presence as Tsuyu laughed and brushed a lock of her hair behind her ear. It made him notice how nicely she was dressed for the evening. Enough for a night out or a bar date, but not too fancy. "How about you?" When she brought up the subject, it seemed only fitting to inquire. The majority of heroes kept their relationships private. As far as he knew, neither Tsuyu nor Katsuki were among them, but some were. As far as he knew, the sea green-haired woman wasn't secretly married or permanently involved with anyone, unlike some of their other co-workers, but he overheard someone, most likely Kirishima or Ishido, discussing how she had dated people occasionally in the past. "I wasn't all that lucky so far," she said with a shoulder shrug. "I wasn't really into them, and the majority of the guys weren't very serious either. I desired to work." She twitched her lower lip once more, and Katsuki scowled. "It felt like I would have plenty of time later, and," she said. Tsuyu glanced at him, and he could sense that she would tell him, but Deku arrived at the exact right time, saying, "I apologize for keeping you waiting. Mom is ecstatic about everything because she has never left Japan before." The ash blonde scowled at the nerd when he said, "Hello, Kachan," not only because he had once again used his nickname but also because, until now, he had completely forgotten about him and Cheeks, who came right after him and went to remove Nagi from Tsuyu's arms to inquire if he was hungry. Yes, he thought to himself as he watched the scene and experienced a strange sensation. It was strange, and he would never publicly acknowledge it, but it seemed as though Deku and Ochako had taken over and forced Tsuyu and himself out when Ochako removed the baby from Tsuyu's arms and approached him to speak. It was strange because it wasn't really his or Tsuyu's place at all. When they took it away from them, it felt more than that, but not all of it. False. Katsuki glanced at Tsuyu and saw that she was no longer grinning either. She must have sensed this too, because she immediately offered him a tiny one. Even though it shouldn't have bothered him, it bothered him a little because it wasn't as bright as those she gave him so readily a moment ago. Nevertheless, the ash blonde had come here for a reason, so he nodded to her, rose from the carpet, and left the small, comfortable bubble that he, Tsuyu, and Nagi were in. Angry that the other man felt the need to follow him into another room, he shook hands with Deku. Probably an office. He didn't realize he hadn't looked back at Tsuyu until he was near the door, and he wondered if he ought to have before Deku dropped his bomb on him and he forgot about her. "Are you resigning?" asked Katsuki, who would later be fucking impressed that he was able to do so at a volume that was suitable for the room. But it had to be the fucking shock. Because Katsuki would have been unable to control his maniacal yelling of those words otherwise. With a single sentence, Deku completely upended his life after bringing him into his home's office, sitting him down, and offering him a drink. Katsuki was completely stunned. Even the nerd watched him closely with a serious and worried expression on his face, and Katsuki didn't even have the strength to tell him not to give him that look. As a result, Katsuki was never as confused as he was now, not even when he learned that Deku had a quirk or how he acquired it. Ochako's pregnant again, and nodded the green-haired man he knew since he was a fucking brat. Again? What do you want to accomplish? Repopulate the planet? Mind your voice, please, and don't tell anyone yet, the other man said impatiently. In any case, it's too early. Katsuki began to rub his palms against the material of his trousers, sensing that they were getting wet despite his best efforts to resist and find a way to say, "Congrats," to the fucking function once more. After 8 months, he finally decided that one of his palms was sufficiently dry, and he made his hand not shake when he grasped his glass to take another sip. "Deku, you're a fucking animal," Katsuki said, glaring at him after he tasted the bitterness of some foreign alcohol Deku had dug from somewhere. Unaware of Katsuki's tone or remark reminding the other hero that he could never even pretend to be this way, let alone act this way even if he wanted to, Deku grinned. "Thank you, Kachan," like a fucking ray of sunshine. This led him back to the main point. "So what now? You're not going to retire. Are you trying to find a new chosen one or something?" Deku shook his head and said, "No, not yet." His blissful state was fading, but not by much. "I just wanted to let you know that I want to spend more time with my family, so I'm leaving the number 1 spot in your hands. Though I won't be on call as frequently as I once was, and I won't be on missions that other heroes can do just as well, I will still be there and go on significant and challenging missions. I've already talked to All Might and..." Katsuki presumably understood the speech's main idea, but he ignored the rest. It seemed unreal. Surreal, even more. "You will hold the top spot after I leave, giving you control over the number 1 spot. Keeping it within your grasp. You idiot." Just before his clenched fist struck the desk with enough force to shatter it, Katsuki snapped. "I don't fucking want your hand-me-downs." Deku ceased talking and adopted a more solemn expression as Katsuki attempted to organize his thoughts in the manner taught by the therapist, but at the moment, it seemed utterly impossible because everything was happening at once. "What on earth is the matter with you?" The other man furrowed his brows slightly, but more like he was perplexed than angry, which infuriated the ash blonde and sent a whirlpool of shock and rage through his head, making his body tremble. "Kachan, how is your lifelong dream of becoming the number 1 hero a hand-me-down?" Deku asked, but he used the fucking wrong tone, making it sound like he was speaking to a brat rather than an equal, which really infuriated Katsuki. "You're fucking aware of it, I would have earned it, are you fucking kidding me with that shit?" he said, essentially spitting out, "Beat you fair and fucking square not, be given it by you." It was excessive. He felt like that spoiled teenager at the sports festival again more than 10 years later. He was hit like a ton of bricks by everything he detested about how he had won back then. It was intolerable to him. This unjust and undeserving victory was too much for him to bear. It infuriated him. He was so furious about it that he was unable to think clearly. How to breathe correctly. He pressed his hands together to blow shit up. They drew closer to hitting something. Especially Deku's foolish, serious, and adult face, which was staring at him like a child having a fit when he was well aware of how the ash blonde felt about such things. He didn't deserve it. He was handpicked or something, but he didn't defeat Deku and the others. Not even that. Before Deku returned from his paternity leave or whatever, he was a fucking stand-in to warm the spot. He got up and said, "I have to leave. Right now, I fucking can't do this." After a moment of disappointment, Deku adopted a more subdued expression and said, "Of course, in a week, my agency will make an announcement." Katsuki's eye twitched in a fiery rage as he said, "You have time to think, go over with your people, and contact us." Deku's tone then shifted to one that was more uncertain and worried, saying, "I'm sorry you feel this way and that I caused this, Kachan. I can see why you're in a difficult situation right now, but I also have to consider my family." Even though Katsuki was aware of this, he still hated at the time. Deku made another attempt, saying, Can I do anything to help?" "No," said Katsuki, interrupting him before he could properly lose it in this comfortable suburban home and heading for the door. With everything he had just learned, he forgot Tsuyu was even in the house and didn't even bother to say goodbye to Cheeks. All he knew was that he had to leave. From between these walls, out of this house. Fresh outdoor air, away from Deku's idyllic family home, was what he needed. As if his life depended on it, he tried to catch his breath and rub his sweaty palms against his pants until he was safely on the other side of the gate. He might as well have broken the door. He had the impression that someone had taken advantage of his peculiarity to transport him to a world where he could have anything he desired, but somehow managed to make him despise it. As in a fairy tale where the lesson is to be careful what you wish for because it could end up biting you in the rear. He couldn't recall the last time he had perspired so profusely. Perhaps he used his quirk to tell authorities when a teacher in middle school scared him. He was afraid they would use it to get him kicked out of UA entrance examinations. His mind went awry. Hero number 1 merely a stand-in until Deku returned. I'm not worthy. I lost. He would not make a good number 1 hero, according to the innumerable articles, interviews, and other media nonsense that his traitorous mind suddenly produced. Not like a human sunshine, a family man who is constantly grinning and consoling Deku. Too hasty, too aggressive, too impolite, too erratic, too sour, too much villainousness. Not enough, fucking damn it, unaware that he was making a lot of noise outside Deku's house, where the bastard could hear him and come to his aid, he snapped. His goddamn palms were sweating uncontrollably, which made him feel increasingly agitated. As a result, his body began to overheat and his heartbeat became so loud and rapid that Katsuki would almost think it was trying to escape from his chest and flee. In addition, all of the insecure bullshit that Deku's news had set off inside of him was clouding his judgment. He was so preoccupied with his own problems that he didn't even notice someone was coming until he flinched at the slight pressure of a palm against his arm. The number 2 hero was rarely, if ever, taken by surprise in that way. Baku-chan. Are you okay? Suyu's dark eyes found him, but aside from the violent jump, neither of them moved away from the other. He didn't respond because he thought his breathing was too erratic and his throat was too dry, almost like. Fuck, I'm experiencing a, he said, panic attack, but his voice didn't sound like him at all. He would have thought it was someone else if they had played him a recording. Someone who was far weaker and more hopeless than he was, even though he knew better at the time. He glanced away from the woman with the sea-green hair beside him and brushed his palms against his trousers once more. Before Suyu could even consider telling her to go to hell and leave him alone, she took advantage of his momentary weakness and pulled his ass into the ground. Come on, sit down for a bit, Kiro, he said. She told him to close your eyes, but he was doing as she said, like a good dog, and didn't even care at the time. In order to fucking avoid feeling so incredibly overwhelmed by everything, he would be happy to grant her the authority to make his decisions at that precise moment. Fuck. Try to think about something else, she said, and from the way her body was close to his, he could tell she was also sitting or kneeling next to him. Since it was difficult to speak while he was hyperventilating, he thought, not that fucking easy, Froggy. Pay attention to my voice, please. She asked in a way that was more like a beg, and the ash blonde couldn't help but wonder why he felt so incredibly inclined to heed her pleas today. Like a damn dog hoping to be referred to as a good boy later on. He could feel the comfort radiating from the circles she drew into his body as her palm moved from his arm to his back. Whatever is bothering you isn't an immediate danger to you, she said. You are safe at this very moment. You're not alone right now, she said in her calming, sage Suyu voice, which, if he weren't so utterly insane, would have made him roll his eyes. He tried to concentrate on them, but the voice and touch continued for a while. Her tone was reassuring. Her voice was pleasant and in no way distracting or obnoxious. Even though her palm was strange, the motion was comforting. If he weren't so anxious and afraid of having a heart attack because his heart was beating so fast right now, the rhythm and repetition of it would almost put him to sleep. His eyes popped open when he felt her other palm suddenly grab his and press it against something warm and soft. Did you just touch your tit with mine? He asked, bewildered, forgetting everything else that was going on with his body as he pressed his hand against her covered chest. Suyu's face turned scarlet the instant his question was understood. He had previously witnessed her embarrassment. He had never seen her expressionless face so red as it was now, but that was the night of that dumb interview. The ash blonde, for some reason, was so enamored with the motion that he didn't even look down at the area his palm was covering. She's so adorable, he thought absently, all flushed like this. He was aware of Suyu's beauty. Even though her body and face were unusual, it only added to her individuality. Particularly when the swimsuit that garnered her so much attention from the media a few years ago was soaked and barely covered. When his hand was still on her breast and her face was so lovely and she was blushing because of him. Katsuki stopped his thoughts from going any farther into dangerous territory. The poor woman stammered, Don't say stuff like that, out loud, but amazingly, she kept his palm pressed against her chest without trying to release it. Although she didn't actually press his palm against her breast, it wouldn't be too difficult to get a handful if he just squeezed a little. I just wanted you to focus on my heartbeat, she said. Such a thing could be helpful during a panic attack, Kiro. Katsuki felt the back of his neck warming, but he was able to control his strange urge to flex his fingers. Yeah, well, having my hand on your breast helped that too, he said, not because he was still freaking out over stupid Deku. Tsuyu bowed her head and turned her head away, letting Katsuki see that her blush extended beneath her collar as well. He was still perplexed by everything her mind was interested in. She asked hesitantly, "Do you feel better?" after licking the tip of her tongue that was out of her mouth. Katsuki felt the heat from behind his neck move lower as his red eyes flitted toward his palm on her chest, sensing that her heartbeat wasn't as steady as it should be. This is strange, he thought to himself just before his crimson eyes widened in horror at the thought that his pants also felt tighter. Fuck. His thoughts were racing to come up with something else to prevent things from getting worse. He wondered what people would think if they discovered them in this state outside the number one hero's home. They would undoubtedly make a scandalous assumption that would backfire on them both. Katsuki swiftly released his hand from her grasp and got to his feet, averting his gaze as he discovered logic and fear within those thoughts. "Thanks," he said, unable to meet her eyes as he frantically brushed the back of his neck with one hand and stuffed the other into his pocket, feeling more uncomfortable than he had in a long time. Tsuyu stood up as well, and since he wasn't ready to face her, he caught a glimpse of her palm fanning her face before she said, as casually as possible, "No problem, I'm glad you're good." Uncertain of what else to say, he nodded and attempted to give them both a moment to collect themselves. The entire night was strange, and to be honest, Katsuki wished it were already over so he could regain his balance and return to a stable ground. The entire world seems to be inverted. "Well, what happened?" After a moment, Tsuyu asked, and even before he gave her a proper look, he could tell that she was staring at him blankly, but with all the worry in her petite frame, ready to assist him in any way she could. Katsuki glared at her, detesting the fact that he had never read her so well in one instant. "Did you know?" Knowing it wouldn't be difficult for him to get angry again, he asked slowly. After being silent for far too long, Tsuyu said, "You know what? That they're expecting another kid," he said, pointing with his chin toward the house. She blinked, and some of her confusion and embarrassment disappeared. Yes, Ochako told me a week ago, but it's still early," she said. "I'm shocked that they told you." "You were aware that he would do that, then?" As another wave of treacherous thoughts swept through his mind, Katsuki asked, turning away and closing his eyes. He had no justification for being angry with her. She was a friend of Cheek's. She was friends with Deku. She owed him nothing. But why did it still make him feel so damned let down? His jaw tightened, and his hands began to shake. "You don't care about her. Your feelings are not her problem. She owed you nothing." "Do what? Do you have another child?" she asked, and it was hard to ignore the bewilderment in her voice. Her mouth was an open door that anyone could enter to see what was going on with her, but her face was the most enigmatic thing he doubted anyone could figure out. At last, Katsuki managed to open his eyes and gaze at the short woman with sea green hair next to him. "Did you know Deku was stepping down?" Katsuki asked. "Stepping down?" Tsuyu blinked and said nothing more for a few beats before opening her mouth wide enough to let her tongue hang out a little. "Holy shit, are you serious?" she said. Even though it was a ridiculous thing to do, Katsuki couldn't help but laugh as her dark eyes doubled in size. When he realized she didn't know about Deku and didn't purposefully keep it from him, he couldn't help but feel a tremendous wave of relief, even though he refused to investigate it further. His frail nerves simply could not handle the strangeness of the day. He would undoubtedly benefit from another day of complete solitude and silence in order to recuperate from the ordeal he endured today. He ought to make plans for additional sessions with his hero therapist. When he eventually finished, he discovered Tsuyu lost in thought, with her finger on her lower lip. He gently nudged her side and said, "Asui Tsuyu, did you just curse out loud? Where his adorable child can hear you? In front of the number one hero's house?" "Can you blame me?" she said, pushing him back with hardly any strength. "I still find it hard to believe what you said." Wait, she said, shaking her head as if she had suddenly realized something and began speaking. "You asked me." "Okami, no, Kiro. I swear, Katsuki, I had no idea." "I believe you," he said, smiling down at her, amazed that he could pull that off after feeling like he might die from a pitiful panic attack moments before. "You never swear like that." He nodded, believing her when she said, "But, really, I didn't know." After a brief period of silence, Katsuki laughed and said, "I still can't believe you cursed." "Well, following such news? Baku-chan, can you blame me?" "Yes, there is no shit. I mistook the jerk's invitation for a blind date, a family dinner, or something. They must have noticed something in each other's faces as they looked at one another because they suddenly burst out laughing. Even though it was only for a brief moment, Katsuki felt somewhat better. Even if it was just for a moment, he and Froggy would be trying to set him up with Deku, Cheeks, and their young child over dinner. Echoing the annoying thought, he took that light instance just out of Katsuki's grasp and said, leaving the number 1 position to you. With a long, weary sigh, the ash-blonde hero brushed his face. Fuck, this is so overwhelming, I can't even think, he said, feeling exhausted beyond words, but no longer feeling like blowing shit up. Tsuyu said, I believe you, and Katsuki was incredibly appreciative. He was certain that using phrases like, I understand, I get it, or something similar would fucking trigger him again, so he would rather have her stand with him with her palm methodically brushing his arm again for a little while longer than yell at her without cause and have her leave his sorry ass to his treacherous and agonizing thoughts alone. Are you going to return inside? She said, not today or tomorrow. He thought that was a reasonable question, but he was unable to really address it. He fucking knew that much. His anger was rising again, so he inhaled deeply and rubbed the back of his neck once more while frowning, saying, I just need to fucking leave. She gave a nod, but for a few seconds they stood motionless in front of Deku's house as though they were unsure of what to do. Let's go out for a drink, said Katsuki, after he felt Tsuyu release his arm and his red eyes gazed at the slowly descending sun for a while. Drinks? He asked, raising his eyebrows at her as he was once more perplexed by her line of reasoning. Social gatherings with alcohol were a part of growing up. Bakugo Katsuki did occasionally go out with Kirishima for something heavy, despite his strong belief that nothing unhealthy should enter his body. In order to avoid making a scene or anything, he preferred to remain composed during other events involving his coworkers, employees, or hero events. He knew how simple it was to thicken him off. He couldn't really remember if he ever saw the heroine with the sea green hair in front of him drinking either when he thought about such incidents. You don't seem focused enough for sparring and sex is. Her cheeks were a little red, but not as much as they had been during the entire tit incident, and she was looking away when his red eyes snapped back at her as though she had cursed again. He felt sorry for her and smirked when she mentioned that she was probably too embarrassed to finish. A drink, huh? He asked, surprised that he could pull it off after everything. He found it amusing and annoying that Tsuyu shrugged her shoulders but kept her eyes off his for a brief moment. I think. This is really big for you, she said after clearing her throat for a while. Even transformative. Additionally, I believe you need some alcohol to help you relax. In addition, he was pleased when her dark eyes met his until she added, it's still a promotion and those should be celebrated. With Tsuyu's eyes staring into his like that and the idea of having her serene presence around for a few more hours without having to ask for it, the ash-blonde half thought of arguing and pointing out that he didn't like being given the number 1 spot like this, that he hated it, but he decided against it, saying, fine. Let's grab a drink together. Why haven't I heard much about your project? After they were seated, he inquired. To give them at least some privacy from being identified, they located a nearby bar with a free back table and an overnight parking lot. She deliberately slowed down even after he held the door for her, so Katsuki knew she let him sit with his back to the wall. Although he was sure that many heroes, including Tsuyu, shared his dislike of people walking behind his back in restaurants and other settings, she acknowledged that he needed it more and gave it to him without being overtly obnoxious or condescending. It was okay at the bar. Having a large crowd was never Katsuki's thing. At least not in locations where he wasn't there to work or study. He would put up with it tonight, if only because he truly liked Tsuyu's company and found her words to be far more consoling than anything the isolation of his apartment could offer. He found out about her project during their joint interview, and from what she told the host after he became afraid of Katsuki and the notes she had, it sounded fucking fantastic. The project addressed the ecological issues of pollution and children who are at risk, and Tsuyu's speech and responses to all of the questions about it demonstrated her genuine concern and the amount of effort she put into it. Even Katsuki, who hardly ever had time for things unrelated to his own career, was intrigued by this one. His question, it's not going too well, caused Tsuyu's shoulders to drop, instantly shattering her composed expression. Although it wasn't as much as I had hoped, I did gain some momentum with the interview. Since the last one, I haven't received many invitations to come and talk, but I need to get it more publicity. When Katsuki heard that, he immediately assumed the worst and scowled, asking, you think that fucker is badmouthing you? The ash-blonde hero would fucking end that fucker right away if he even mentioned Tsuyu's name. She shook her head as their child waitress arrived, took their orders, and then hurried off, clearly star-struck. I don't think it's that, Katsuki said, rolling his eyes as Suyu laughed at the younger woman's antics before she went back to the subject they had been discussing. I don't get asked to attend these kinds of shows very often because I'm not as well known as you guys. Normally, I don't mind, but this project, she sighed, her face dejected, which made Katsuki laugh unpleasantly. I would really want it to be successful, and I would hate if I was the reason it failed, she said. The awkward child waitress arrived and put down their glasses just as he was about to argue with her. Katsuki was anything but modest, and he had heard enough compliments about his good looks and attractiveness if he could hold his tongue for more than a minute. As a result, he could tell the girl was trying to get his attention by acting too adorably and vivaciously, which only made the situation more awkward. Suyu gave him a look that said, someone's popular, as she raised her eyebrows at him after she left. He remarked, she's a kid, but to be honest, he didn't really look at her. Instead, he was content to focus on his companion's dark eyes. He might have had a nasty mouth, but he would never treat any woman he went somewhere with disrespectfully by flirting with another. This was a friendly drink or something, regardless of what others thought of him. In addition, he was never desperate enough to pursue waitresses who were nearly 10 years his junior. I believe she's in her early 20s, Suyu smiled, fortunate. That makes her a kid, and you're barely out of your 20s, Katsuki grimaced. Actually, I'm 28, she said, lifting her glass. Since he detested clicking the glass, he would have rolled his eyes, but the information startled him. How is that possible? He asked. February is when I was born. After saying, I was a fast study, she clicked their glass and took a sip. If the way her lips twisted was any indication, the alcohol was clearly not her territory. Before teasing her, he burst out laughing and said, yeah, in everything but drinking. Even though the liquid burned his throat, he would rather endure another attempt at attention grabbing by their child waitress than acknowledge that. Send me more information about it. I might as well make the most of my new position if I'm truly going to be the top hero in a week. Although his mood soured somewhat, he and Suyu both avoided sinking into the same pit they had been in before, saying, it won't be so bad. Even if the way you did isn't ideal, you still merited it? Not, yes, you did, she said firmly, setting her glass down loudly enough to make her point clear. Baku-chan, everyone can see it. Even though you believe that people only see you as a loudmouthed jerk, they still consider you to be a good hero. You put your health and life in danger to defend others and combat evildoers. Dear fucking God, he wanted to believe her when she said, no one, not even Izu-chan, works as hard as you to be at the top. His therapist made him tell himself things she said, but he couldn't help but feel that he would never be able to have the same impact as Suyu at that moment. It just doesn't feel like I earned it, he said, clenching and unclenching his fist close to his glass. I want to beat his ass like a fuck. Show everyone that I'm worthy of this. That I deserve it and I'm strong. Sue, I don't want to be handed down. Her gaze was incomprehensible to him because it was the same as the way she always looked at him and other people, but her voice was full of patience as she said, but you did earn it, Kiro. He found it difficult to believe, despite the fact that she made it seem so real. Even though you worked your ass off to reach number 2 and waited it out, right at Deku's heel, you might not have stolen the title from him in a fight to the death. Since he will no longer be number 1, you are the only one who can accept it, even though you waited just an inch behind him. You deserved it. You earned it. And now, Kiro, it's yours. Because he didn't want her to see how easily she could dismiss his concerns and doubts, he grabbed his glass to take another sip. Her ability to uplift his mood and make him feel better was fucking pitiful. Perhaps more of her presence would be good for his mental health. After all, he might as well hire her as his personal cheerleader. All right, that's reasonable, Froggy, he said, setting his glass down once more and observing her take another sip. However, she still didn't fucking appear to enjoy it. What about the others, though? Who? Confused, Suyu asked. The general public. There's no way I can defeat a villain with a busted arm and smile for the camera while praising some brats for taking cover or whatever, he said, as if it weren't immediately apparent. He wasn't even inventing this. Deku actually completed all of that last month while also expressing gratitude to everyone who helped with their efforts. The ash blonde occasionally had the vibe of someone in between middle school and the University of Arizona. He was no longer able to communicate with others without yelling or yelling at them. After giving it some thought and pressing her finger to her lower lip, the sea-green-haired heroine said, I guess you're right. If I saw you do that, I think I would have assumed someone had given you a strange quirk or something. Hello. She assured him with a serene smile that seemed to threaten to regain his trust, but I don't think anyone expects you to be anything, other than yourself, Kiro. I think Deku's sunny personality gives people hope, but your passion gives them strength, she said. Despite everything, she gestured to him, you're strong, eager, and loyal. In your own unique manner, you are a good hero. Didn't she just have to go and fucking make me feel better with every single word? She kept her eyes on his, making sure he was paying attention, and he thought, fighting back a smirk that froze when he felt her hand reach for his. You couldn't turn your head away from her like this. Deku wouldn't feel at ease handing it over to almost anybody. He is able to resign because he is confident that he is leaving the role in the best possible hands. Someone he believes is a good and deserving hero. Someone who can deliver despite the pressure and effort that come with it. Therefore, don't be concerned about your appearance or what other people may think of you. When you blew up at that host, you got praise instead of criticism. Even though your mouth is filthy, people can see that you have a good heart, Kiro. She laughed and eventually let him go so she could get her glass. Hearing her speak so kindly of him as though he deserved it was nearly too much for him to handle again. Katsuki loved heroism and its glory, but he never felt very at ease around civilians and their private expressions of appreciation. This was incredibly similar, and he couldn't resist using his hand to occupy himself by stroking the nape of his neck. Now, Tsuyu said with a slightly playful tone and a smile, may we all have a drink to celebrate your impending promotion to Japan's #1 hero? He looked at her once more in an attempt to erase the shame her speech had caused. Fine, let's celebrate that, he said, rolling his eyes and snatching his glass after thinking somewhat positively of the fucking cheerleader. You're embarrassed by the praise, aren't you, Baku-chan? Tsuyu said, tilting her head cooing at him while giggling. Kiro, you are so cute. His cheeks were hot, and he wished he could attribute his blush to the alcohol. Shut up, he told her. She continued to hold him accountable, saying, nope, you should let more people see this side of you. He took another sip. After that, no one would refer to you as a bad boy. Even though he couldn't believe everything Tsuyu said about him, he decided that he could get drunk in her company and unwind for a change. Die, he said without any heat, finished his drink, and waved to the overly eager child waitress to get them another round. He grabbed Tsuyu's still full glass and said, the same for me, and something fruity for her. I thought you said in the car, I would embarrass you if I ordered anything girly, the heroine said, beaming at him with delight. I had a change of heart. Every time you take a sip, I can't watch you twist your lips. Anything you want is yours, he said. You're worthy. He certainly thought so, even though he didn't say it aloud. He didn't believe that anyone, not even Kirishima or his publicist, could make his problems any easier the way Tsuyu did tonight. He was so incredibly impressed. He smirked as she smiled at him, putting her hands under her face and closing her eyes as if she was eager to drink her weak fruity shit. She assured him, thank you, I swear to be nothing but happy about my tasty girly drink. You'd better. Katsuki made a silent promise at that point that he would fucking make sure he would assist Tsuyu with her Kids at the Beach project, even if he didn't accomplish anything else while he was #1 hero. In Tsuyu's presence, Katsuki was able to forget the passing of time and the majority of his uncertainties and anxieties over the course of the following 3 hours. Both in Deku's home and during the interview, the same thing occurred. The two superheroes struck up a casual conversation about everything from their jobs to their families and relationships to everyday and interesting topics. The naturalness of their dynamic didn't surprise Katsuki as much this time as it had the previous time, but he couldn't help but find it odd. He couldn't recall ever being able to talk so freely with anyone. Though he wasn't particularly talkative or interested in other people's company, he couldn't help but acknowledge that he enjoyed Tsuyu's. Not only because of the alcohol, either. It was more than just the fact that she cheered him up and gave him praise as though she knew he needed it. She also did that, but it went beyond that. Without even realizing it, there was something about her that made him feel at ease. Nevertheless, he assumed that everything good had to end, so he proposed that they finish their drinks and call it a night when Tsuyu's cheeks appeared flushed for longer than a few minutes and she appeared more giddy than normal. In addition, the venue began to fill up. Even though Katsuki was only 2 sips away from finishing his last drink as she went to the bathroom, he was still thankful for the laid-back atmosphere he was in despite feeling a little let down that the evening was coming to an end. It is hoped that he will continue to ride the wave until tomorrow morning, when he will talk to his publicist about his impending promotion to #1 hero. Bakugo Katsuki, Japan's new #1 hero. He practically grinned to himself. Tonight, for the first time, it didn't make him feel angry and disappointed. By one of the nearby tables, he overheard other patrons utter the words, honestly, so weird. Although he was unsure, he believed it was the same individual who had captured a photo or video of him and Tsuyu when the venue became crowded approximately an hour ago. As annoying and embarrassing as it was to have to talk to people, Katsuki always found it more than a little sinister when someone was secretly filming or taking pictures of him and his coworkers. A few people stopped by to thank them for their work and said they were fans. Requesting a photo or something would be one thing, but why the secrecy? He was aware that Tsuyu had also noticed and had proposed that they depart sooner, but she had declined, claiming that there was no use for recording the two of them conversing. He watched those extras in case they tried something shady, but she was right. I only heard positive things about Floppy. She's adorable and very sweet. The other guy with the creeper who was filming them said, you know, like the innocent girl next door. Katsuki narrowed his eyes and then gave them a sidelong glance. None of the three men were overly fancy or expensive, but they were dressed for a night out. He would assume that they held low-paying office jobs. In order to quietly finish his drink, Katsuki nearly ignored the following sentences, which emphasized Tsuyu's status as a heroine and some of her missions or rescues that they had read about in the media. What makes someone like him want to be with someone like her? Katsuki's fingers were quickly wrapped around his glass. He is him. Even before they began disparaging him, the pro-hero was aware of what they were going to say. He had heard all of those things numerous times before, and it seemed that the media enjoyed reminding him and everyone else of how awful he could be. Another person nodded and said, yeah, he looks like the ultimate fuckboy. I heard how his last girlfriend wrote a whole blog about how aggressive he was during sex, as if she was actually afraid of him. Knowing they had no idea what they were talking about, Katsuki rolled his eyes, feeling more irritated than angry. The woman in question was a very foolish one-night stand from roughly 7 years ago, not a girlfriend. He talked to Tsuyu tonight about the violence and they didn't spend as much time together. He called it quits and departed because she wanted him to be even rougher than he was comfortable with. She attempted to blackmail him around 3 years ago by saying she would go to the media and say he had been violent with her in the bedroom. He didn't fall for it, of course, and told her to do as she pleased. He was angry that someone could say such things and some people would believe it because he had that violent fuckboy look or something, but the story didn't make much of a fuss because there was no proof and Deku, Kirishima, Todoroki, and even All Might spoke for him. That someone like that is a hero and everyone just forgives him for everything else is fucking awful. She could do much better and consider her image and reputation more. What are those idiots aware of? He made an effort to think. In any case, none of them had a chance against someone as amazing and stunning as Tsuyu. It isn't as though you do either. He was shocked that such a thought even occurred to him, and his red eyes blinked and rounded, losing their usual sharp edge. Objectively, Tsuyu was a beautiful woman. Because of her hero labor, she had a unique appearance and an extremely fit body. Even though she cruelly teased him tonight, he never felt the need to leave because she was so amazing, kind, cool, and encouraging. To put it briefly, the heroine with the sea green hair was attractive. Katsuki wasn't that interested in her, though, in spite of everything. He didn't seem to understand until tonight how nice and helpful it would be to have her in his life. This was just a hangout with a possible friend, not a date or anything. What makes him want to try with her? And if he didn't, why should he care? However, as he began to obsess over it, he was overcome by yet another set of fears. As those jerks noted, Tsuyu had that good girl persona going on, and it would look strange and bad for her if she was seen with someone as violent and harsh as Katsuki. He was certain that she would be questioned about it as if she had gone crazy and was naive or something. He scowled, but his disappointment outweighed his rage. If he was the reason she had a harder time getting interviews or had to deal with shady hosts like that jerk from the last time, he would fucking hate himself. That's how people perceive you. Someone who would be a better villain than a hero who is only accepted because number two's actions are irrelevant as long as he performs his duties. Instead of being a nasty, loudmouthed person who can't fake a smile to advance his career, number one hero should be a community leader or something. Additionally, it makes you consider how foolish and unsophisticated Floppy could be if she spends time with him. When Katsuki realized what the man had said, his personal torture stopped. That was not a fucking insult from him. As Katsuki glared at those men, the thought crossed his mind. He was allowing them to say such things about Tsuyu, even though those jerks were free to say anything they wanted about him. Exactly, isn't she concerned about the potential consequences for her reputation? It's really disheartening that she would so blatantly ruin what women have to work so hard to achieve. She's adorable, but doesn't Bakugo prefer attractive women who are on par with models? He smashed the glass so forcefully that he might have broken it, and he even heard a tiny crack as his rage and copious amounts of alcohol reached uncontrollable heights. He could use his quirk carelessly on the glass and possibly even on those three idiots if he wasn't careful, which he really didn't want to be at the time. All I know is that when nice girls fall for bad guys like that, it's really annoying. They typically abandon a really good guy in the evening for no apparent reason, and it's obvious that this won't work out. A fast lay? It makes them appear pitiful, as if they're only there to get fucked, in my opinion. However, that might be the case. Floppy is also kind of hot in that strange way. This magazine featured her on its cover. Yes, I am aware of that tight bathing suit. She was so attractive in those days. I can't recall how many times I viewed the picture and... With his knee knocked against the table, Katsuki got to his feet, ready to let those jerks know how aggressive he could be. He was pretty sure he wouldn't just leave it with fists if he got to them, and the alcohol and general rage that he couldn't place before could now possess his sense and rational thinking. He nearly reached their table, and they must have sensed his hostile energy as it was directed at them, because they both looked at him in fear. But before he could get to them, Tsuyu materialized in front of him, seemingly out of nowhere, like a freaking dream, blocking out those idiots and filling his field of vision until he could only see her. Even when the sea green-haired woman stepped onto her toes and placed her palm to the back of his neck to pull him down to her face, Katsuki didn't realize what she was doing, even though he had a second to realize it and might have expected it if it had been someone else. Not until he automatically closed his eyes and experienced one of the most tender kisses he had ever experienced in his life, her soft lips pressing against his own. This feels good, damn it. It was accurate. Katsuki had no shortage of women interested in him after graduation. They pursued him, made up reasons to see him, touched him as though he were theirs, or anything else. It was usually those women who initiated contact. He didn't mind that they were so brazen. However, their kisses, touches, and other forms of affection also reflected that audacity. They expected Katsuki to be as demanding, passionate, and rough as they were. They weren't inherently incorrect, but occasionally they asked him to be much rougher than he felt comfortable being. Like everyone else, they assumed they knew him based only on his harshness and rudeness, and they didn't bother to look past that. Tsuyu kissed him at that moment as if he were weak but not fragile. He shouldn't have been shocked when she kissed him with the same feeling, but he was still taken aback by the way it felt. She also spoke and touched him in that way. In a way, it made him feel vulnerable on the inside, even though he would fucking rather die than acknowledge it. It was sweet and comforting. Strangely, he really enjoyed it. He put his hands on the back of her head and upper back and drew her in, enjoying the gentle kissing and inhaling the scent of the 3 fruity drinks she had consumed tonight and the soothing shampoo he had smelled on her earlier at Deku's house. I kissed her and it felt ridiculously sweet. Something glowed inside him as her teeth lightly nibbled his bottom lip. Although there was a tiny fire in the shadowy forest that might grow and engulf the entire area, it was currently quite contained, small, and safe. Lovely. The vocabulary of someone like Katsuki did not include such words. When Sue's lovely and soft lips moved ever so delicately against his own, sparking something warm and cozy inside his chest, pushing out every last drop of tension inside his body as if it were a poltergeist, it was the only thing he could think of. However, his foul mouth felt too rude for something so sweet and nice. She kept the kiss going. Even though her actions were too slow and delicate to qualify as a break, it took him an excessive amount of time to open his red eyes and gaze at her after her lips stopped moving against his. Nobody ever really saw anything in her dark eyes. Even though her frog-like appearance was to blame, Katsuki took solace in their familiarity and emotionlessness. His thumb moved lightly over the texture of her hair while his hands stayed in it. He thought absently, silky, go figure, still not sure if he was in the present or in some dreamlike reality because everything that had happened and continued to happen today was simply too far from the hero's typical routine. The height difference between them became more apparent when Tsuyu went back to her heels, and Katsuki saw her free hand move in front of her mouth to keep him from seeing the tip of her tongue licking her mouth. He felt a hot rush as his pants tightened once more. Don't let them ruin this night for you, he thought, just before her hand moved from his neck to his chest. Fuck, that's hot. It took him some time to understand her meaning and the reason he was standing there in the first place because he was so taken aback by their kiss. Katsuki's mood soured noticeably, even though it had no reason to, as he realized she needed to hear those jerks and their nonsense and realize he was approaching them to express his feelings. She must have kissed him for that reason. Of course, you moron. Why else would she suddenly kiss you? Even though he didn't even consider kissing her until she did, he felt a little pitiful that he didn't realize it sooner. He practically moaned to himself. But why had she kissed him? In a more Tsuyu-style manner, she could have simply told him to accompany her or told those jerks to go die. She didn't have to taste what the mouths of the others tasted like for them both. If she had done something so extreme and foolish, She must have been more inebriated than he had assumed. That was inferior to Suyu. Furthermore, why wouldn't she fucking push it harder if she was going for a show? There was nothing scandalous to be concerned about, but the kiss was sweet. He was going to tell her that when he saw the way her throat moved as she swallowed and brushed a few hairs behind her ear, as her cheeks ached pink. He was struck once more by how well it fit her. I must also be more inebriated than I realized. When his hands released her, she stepped back, establishing a safe distance, and he noticed those jerks staring at him. They appeared appropriately enraged and envious, and damn if that didn't make the ash blonde smirk with pride and forget his frustration. Take a good look, you fuckers, he thought smugly as he stepped closer to Suyu, lowering his face just enough to whisper in her ear, let's go. It felt great to know that this was something they disapproved of and that Suyu was someone they had their eye on when he was the one taking her out. His hand found a firm spot on her lower back as he led her outside, catching those men and a few others observing them until they were gone. Since he left with a woman like Asui Suyu, Katsuki wanted them to suffer while they lived their mediocre lives, even though it was childish and he shouldn't really care about such nobodies. His triumph was short-lived, as he became irritated once more upon discovering that she had surreptitiously paid their bill while using the restroom. She claimed she still owed him an imaginary debt for their interview, but he wanted to let her know that he was fucking making more than she could ever imagine. He put his palm back by his side and said, I told you, you don't owe me shit. He no longer had any legitimate reason to lead her, anyway. In addition to feeling strange, he discovered that her back was pleasant and that his palm fitted nicely. He felt like he was being unclean to her, and it was crazy the night she kissed him and put his hand on her tit. Before things got any stranger, he really needed to go to bed. As they headed to wait for their ride, she countered, and I told you, I wanted to repay you somehow. Fortunately, Suyu had a sturdy jacket covering her body, so he didn't need to help her deal with the cold but bearable air. Weird night, he thought, frowning at his own thoughts, but it wouldn't be a complete pain in the ass if I did have to warm her up. Even though her cheeks were now red from the cold night, Suyu looked at him and appeared much less inebriated than before. After observing his face for some time, she nodded and said, yeah, I'm sorry. It pissed those fuckers off, he said, looking at her, aware of what she wanted to say, and not really in the mood to lapse into some unspoken awkwardness. We're doing fine. He smirked at her, and he knew they would be all right when she smiled back at him. Remember to send me those pictures, Kiro, she said to him as Katsuki's eyes couldn't seem to take their eyes off of her and the wind made her hair twirl a bit. Still enthralled with her hair, he cautioned her, okay, but don't post anything with me. He had never given it much thought, so he wouldn't have guessed that it was silky, but it made sense. Her hair looked good. Even though he was curious about it, everyone else made such a big deal out of it that he decided not to join the annoying group and ask her about it. He recalled a few years ago when it was shorter, barely reaching her shoulders because she caught it. When he realized how ridiculous it all sounded aloud, he said, the last thing I want is for people to think I like spending time with Deku's brat or with Deku in Deku's house. He scowled at her when she said, he likes you too, but she still grinned broadly at him. He rolled his eyes, but her taunting in reference to Deku's child did not make him feel any better. Strangely enough, despite the night's many ups and downs, Katsuki didn't feel like complaining all that much. As they watched the car she had ordered to pick her up approach, Suyu remarked, I really like us becoming friends, Baku-chan. The ash blonde gave her a look. He enjoyed it too, but he wasn't sure how to put it. Before he knew it, the car arrived, and Suyu wished him a good night, saying, be careful. For too long, her gaze was fixed on his. She sounded so sincere that he knew she meant it, even though her expression remained the same. You too, Su-chan, he said, and he thought of her as a friend because of the way she smiled and blinked at him, indicating that she understood. And thanks for everything you did tonight, he said quickly because he had kind of avoided saying it before. Suyu nodded to him once more. Even though he had a driver waiting for them to finish so he could drive her home, Katsuki couldn't explain why, but he felt a strange impulse to ask her to stay with him a little while longer while he was staring at her under the night sky with street lamps and lights from surrounding buildings. There was really no reason for her to stay other than the fact that he would like it if she did, which was absurd because he already occupied a lot of her time and he wasn't as messy about things that happened as he used to be. He was unsure of what was holding him, and he feared it was a combination of the alcohol, loneliness, and the phony, gentle kiss they had just shared. Nevertheless, he forced those desires aside and said, text me when you get home, okay, Froggy? When he felt like smiling instead, his warning to her, don't go to sleep or I'll fucking come over and kill you, hardly sounded like a threat. With a little giggle, Suyu nodded and held up her phone, saying, "Text me back this time, Kiro." As he watched the car with her inside vanish around the corner, just like he had the night of their interview, he nodded and let her go. He couldn't help but think that because of her, he would have to endure the entire night and all of that insecure bullshit and disappointments again. When Suyu later followed through on her promise to text him, he responded right away before he got ready for bed. He was still in a good place because of his old new friend's calm and encouraging demeanor, which prevented his thoughts from going out of control. He could tell he wouldn't be hungover. He thanked her again for tonight after he went to bed and sent her the pictures, even the ones that featured him. Froggy. Katsuki, you never need to thank me for that. It was sufficient that you let me spend this evening with you. Fuck, Froggy, are you certain I can't have you as my personal cheerleader? He asked aloud into his bedroom's darkness before turning to look at the city lights outside his large bedroom windows. He always cherished that view, and he frequently slept with the curtains open to take in the scenery when he wasn't too worn out from work or in need of a restful night's sleep. Though the ash blonde always enjoyed the view from Deku's bedroom and vowed to one day own a place even higher than he did, Deku always liked Katsuki's family home when they were younger. He assumed that both of them succeeded in obtaining the ideal homes they had dreamed about as children. Unconsciously grinning and not really trying to hide it, Katsuki looked through his phone and the photos that had been taken today. It was almost like a real family, he thought, and oddly, the thought wasn't as unsettling as he would have imagined when he was talking about one of his co-workers, Deku's brat, and himself, who had never even held a child that small in his arms until today. He continued to shake his head, attributing it to the alcohol and the emotional turmoil brought on by tonight's news from Deku. In the end, he selected the picture of Suyu and Nagi grinning into the camera and used it as his background in her caller ID before reminding her that he needed to talk to the older man about the kids at the beach project and his publicist about it tomorrow. At that moment, he put his phone on the nightstand and fell asleep with a sense of calm that had never been there before. He was content with everything for tonight, even though tomorrow would be exhausting. What do you think the main point is, perhaps related to national security? Perhaps a new villain organization has emerged. In an attempt to blend in and stay invisible amidst the sea of reporters and other journalists waiting for the Japan Hero Association to make an announcement, Sue remained silent. Although she could hear all of their guesses, none of them had yet proven to be accurate. None of them anticipated learning, unlike Sue, that Katsuki had taken Izuku's place as Japan's #1 hero after Izuku had resigned. She had learned from Katsuki's occasional texts that it was better this way. His and Deku's publicists agreed that they could better control the news's dissemination and possibly steer clear of the majority of the negative publicity and backlash by making a physical announcement. Sue hoped it would work for the nerves of everyone. She lightly combed her bangs in the hopes that they and her sunglasses would effectively conceal her face. She was anxious as well, hoping that the conference would go well because she would hate for someone or something to ruin it and for Katsuki to get promoted so soon after receiving it because of his insecurities, which he had shared with her a week prior. Sue had a strange sense of camaraderie with the loudmouth ash blonde, despite the fact that it appeared strange on the outside. She understood most of his struggles because she was all too aware of how her appearance and actions as a pro-heroine put her in a box. Additionally, it was only natural for Sue to want to support him during these difficulties, which is essentially the reason she initially came here. To express support. Is that you, Sue-chan? Someone from the door asked, and Sue's eye widened slightly because she was afraid that people nearby would recognize her from the loud volume. A few people looked, but it appeared that everyone but one became disinterested right away. Thank you, Cammy. Sue held her breath and waited. Finally, a woman who appeared to be the only one observing her closely turned around, but the heroine with the sea green hair could see her hand moving as she took notes on her phone. I'm hoping this is merely a coincidence. She gestured quickly for Kirishima Eijiro to approach. He then put his hands together and muttered, "Sorry," as she pressed her finger to her lips and he did the same. The heroine with the sea green hair grinned because she wasn't particularly angry, primarily because it didn't seem like anyone had yet recognized them. I guess it wasn't really smart to call out your name like that, the red-headed hero said, fumbling nervously with the cap to cover his striking hair, civilian clothes, and glasses. No problem, Sue said, waving her hand at his concerns. It's not as though my attempts to go somewhere covertly ever really worked. It was, regrettably, true. Sue's distinctive frog-like features made it nearly impossible for her to blend in unless she really tried. All she did today was put on her civilian clothes, wear nice sunglasses to cover her dark eyes, and tie her hair in a braided bun on top of her head. Did you come for Bakugo too? He asked, still wearing an apologetic expression as he stepped next to her. Before the weekend, he told me. It was a shocker, lowering his voice to a level that would be inaudible to the media. I said that if he would allow it, I would like to come and support him. Sue heard that and grinned. Although some may find Katsuki's actions offensive, Eijiro was always by his side, demonstrating that the ash blonde wasn't all that horrible. Particularly during their last two encounters, she discovered that firsthand. After some time, he acknowledged, I was surprised he told you too. I mean, you even took him out to celebrate, which was super kind and manly of you, Sue said, noticing a hint of suspicion in his voice. The hero's use of his UA made her laugh. Well, it wasn't really intentional, goes the old slogan. At Izu-chan's house, we first met. Yeah, he said, lost in thought, before giving her a sincere smile and making a positive fist motion with his hand in front of his chest. I knew how you are, and I could tell he was in a really good place when he told me, he said. You must have been of great assistance to him. Sue-chan, I'm happy he had you to confine him. Sue was proud that he would think that, given the relationship between Katsuki and Eijiro. She also didn't really express it, but she couldn't help but feel relieved when she realized Katsuki must have just mentioned that Sue had taken him out for drinks rather than the fatal mistake she made that night when she kissed him. I still don't understand why I did that, she couldn't help but reflect, remembering what had happened a week prior. Asui Suyu most likely never felt so ill when she woke up on a day off until that morning after their drinks. She was shocked and a little upset with herself for doing that to Katsuki at such a vulnerable time when he was doubting himself. It wasn't as though she had any intention of doing it. She didn't feel the need to pull Katsuki's face in her direction and give him that kind of blow. They had a great time together, and he was attractive. Nevertheless, Sue took pride in her ability to be reasonable and typically gave such things some thought following a few pleasant dates with people she had been eyeing for some time. Not coworkers with whom she had recently become friends. It wasn't planned or anticipated because, until a few months ago, she hardly ever, if at all, considered the ash blonde hero. It began when she went to pay and use the restroom before Katsuki had a chance. One of the three men had taken a picture of them earlier that night, and she passed the table with them. Damn, that ass, one of them said to the other two, and she could hear it very clearly and loudly. In a swimsuit, it must look even more stunning. She nearly stopped and dealt with the harassment as a result. Even if she didn't feel particularly inebriated, she was still intoxicated, and things could easily get out of hand, so she told herself at the last minute that wouldn't be the best course of action. In the end, she just paid their bill and used the restroom before being stopped by two elderly women who thanked her for all of her hard work and praised her previous rescue attempt. She and Katsuki were sitting there when a number of people arrived, so it wasn't a huge deal until one of those kind women grimaced and said, "You really must have the nerves of a saint, dear." As the other woman attempted to shake her head and give her friend some kind of signal, she honestly said, "Excuse me, I don't think I understand." Well, to be able to stand the company of that rude man, she said. Because he behaved like such a savage, I was unable to even greet him. Perhaps you ought to think twice about hanging out with someone like that. For a few moments, Sue stared at the woman in utter disbelief before hot rage flared inside of her. She was adept at controlling her emotions and didn't make snap decisions like some of her coworkers, including Katsuki, but the combination of the alcohol and Katsuki's nighttime confiding in her overcame her, and before she knew it, she gave the woman her best attempt at a chilly stare before declaring, "That person is our number 2 hero, Kiro. Even for those like you who say such things about him, he put his life in danger more times than you can count. He may be impolite, but that only serves to highlight his deep concern for others, which is something that not all heroes would be prepared to do in an attempt to save you." She ignored the shocked expressions on those women's faces and kept walking toward Katsuki and their table when she heard the three men continue to argue. "Please, if you don't have anything nice to say about someone, you shouldn't talk at all, excuse me," she said. To be honest, they encountered adoring or star-stuck fans every other day. She was frustrated, though, when she heard how they were treating her so disrespectfully while pretending to have her best interests at heart. Tonight, it seems like everyone is a critic, she thought. She knew what would happen when she saw how suddenly the ash blonde got up from their table and hurried over to him. Just calming him down would have made more sense. She might have done that if her body hadn't been humming from how upset she was over all those people and her mind hadn't already been clouded by alcohol that lowered her inhibitions. Instead, as soon as she approached the ash blonde, she couldn't stop thinking about how foolish they were all and how even Katsuki could find love with someone like her. Yes, even she could be with someone as attractive as him. Fortunately, Katsuki dismissed her apology without making a big deal out of it. Sue was confident that their brittle and recently formed friendship would endure without any unwelcome awkwardness because they had even exchanged a few texts since then. She thought, "Thank you, Cammy. I would hate myself if I ruined it like that before they had a chance." Even though she wouldn't take it back, she detested the fact that she had done something so careless. Those people did benefit from it. She struggled to figure it out for a while before deciding to blame the alcohol and the fact that Katsuki was at his lowest, and their hurtful remarks weren't helping. "I simply don't understand why they got under my skin so much." As she snapped out of her reverie and returned to the present moment of Katsuki's promotion, she said to Eijiro, "Katsuki wouldn't be able to accept anyone's help and support if it weren't for you, Kiro." "Ah," the red-headed hero said with a cheerful smile, "don't say stuff like that. I'll start thinking about it." "All right," she said with a giggle, giving him a break. A stunning older woman approached him and said, "Hello, Eijiro-kun," in an excessively loud voice. However, Sue knew she was Katsuki's mother before she even said a word. They appeared eerily similar. Kirishima said, "Hello, Bakugo-san," and Sue gave her a slight smile. It appeared that others chose to join her and Kirishima in supporting Katsuki. "I'm glad you made it, even if they did it in secret. Bakugo will appreciate it." "I don't think so. It was such a pain to get the brat to tell you. Unless Izuku told him that Inko knew, I'm confident he wouldn't even bother." "Pardon me," said a man who had arrived with Katsuki's mother, likely his father, glancing straight at Sue, who had made an effort to avoid listening in. "Aren't you the pro-heroine Floppy?" "Yes, I'm Asui Suyu," she said, bowing to Katsuki's parents after looking around to make sure no one was listening. "I'm glad to have met you, Bakugo-san." "Don't tell me you broke up with that sweet girl of yours." Katsuki's mother shot Eijiro a look right away. "No, that's not the case." Sue briefly covered her smile with her hand before giggling. "I actually came to support Baku-chan." After halting her reprimands of the other hero, the woman turned to face her and smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Baku-chan? Does he permit you to call him that?" "Since the UA days," Eijiro added with a smile, and the woman appeared suitably amused. "This is Masaru, and you can call me Mitsuki. The father of Katsuki." "It's a pleasure to meet you," the man said. "So you came to support our kid, huh?" Mitsuki gestured for Sue and Eijiro to follow. "That guy is really secretive. I had no idea that you were close." Sue had a weird feeling that the woman was assuming things about her that she shouldn't be, even though she shouldn't. This was something that most mothers did. She had the impression that she was being watched closely. She performed well under duress. Even though she had been doing it for years, she still hoped she wouldn't say anything that would make Katsuki angry later. "This is a new development. After graduation, we didn't communicate much until a few months ago." During the interview, Mitsuki interrupted, and she nodded as her eyes softened, displaying nothing but genuine pride. "I was thrilled when he did that," she said. "He consistently fights evildoers and saves lives, but in that interview, he revealed that he had a heart as well and is deserving of all the attention." Sue understood the woman's meaning and nodded. Even though she was aware up until that point that Katsuki was more than just his loudmouth persona, she couldn't help but smile because she was happy that more people would see it. She was happy to be one of those individuals. Before Katsuki, Izuku, and a few others, likely from the Japan Hero Association, came and took their respectful seats in front of the microphones, they engaged in some small talk. When Sue saw how hard the hero worked to keep himself presentable and professional, she couldn't help but smile again. His suit appeared pricey and expertly tailored, and it fit him flawlessly. His hair was clearly styled specifically for today, as she had never seen it like this before. She would assume he was a very serious businessman who took great satisfaction in constantly managing everything, including himself, if she didn't know any better. Before he sat down, Katsuki looked around the room. His expression stayed the same, dominated by his ubiquitous Bakugo scowl. She made sure to mouth, "You got this," because she would have sworn he lingered at her face for a moment. Sue could feel Mitsuki turn her head toward her, but she was unable to take her eyes off Katsuki. As her body began to comprehend the gravity of the situation, it was almost vibrating. The number one hero would be Katsuki. More significantly, his dream would come true at last. He had been working on it since he was a young boy. Sue was aware of the seriousness of the situation. She couldn't help but feel incredibly happy and proud of the man in front of her, despite the fact that she was currently dealing with her own unmet dreams. Exactly 1 week after the night they met at Izuku's house, the news broke that Bakugo Katsuki would be the next number one hero in Japan. She, Katsuki's family, and Eijiro watched as everything unfolded as his agency had planned. Like the man himself, Izuku's speech was heartfelt, self-assured, and incredibly optimistic when he announced his resignation, knowing that he was leaving the position in capable hands. Katsuki sounded extremely professional but also appreciative, perhaps unconsciously, demonstrating how much it meant to him that Izuku had such high regard for him. Sue would say it went pretty well overall. Naturally, the other people in the room were taken aback and began asking questions in a rather disorganized manner because they weren't expecting this. Nevertheless, they seemed sincere and direct at the same time. They decided to call it quits since it appeared that nothing new could be said and many of the questions began to recur or were at the time unanswerable. Sue believed she heard someone ask loudly, "Why was she here anyway?" as she was leaving, and she was positive she saw someone pointing a camera at her and the others. However, she was uncertain whether they were referring to her. "Will you not accompany us to greet him?" Masaru inquired in a soft, quiet voice. She considered it for a while. Maybe Katsuki wanted to do this with his family by his side, free from outside interference. "Come on. He wouldn't ask you to come if he didn't want you around," she said, pushing her Mitsuki and even throwing her arm around the younger woman's shoulders. "You're here already. Why wait another 5 minutes?" She had no time to respond before she was abruptly taken to another room where Katsuki was leaning against the wall and listening to a slightly younger-looking woman who must have been the man's assistant and an older, kind-looking man. Sue saw Izuku talking to someone on the phone by the window. As Mitsuki let her go and argued with her son about how it wouldn't harm him to smile a little more, they exchanged a wave. The ash blonde put an end to the argument with a firm, "Just drop it already, you old hag," after she and Eijiro exchanged a humorous glance over Katsuki getting laid into like a child. "You." A fresh argument was abruptly stopped when Sue said, "Ah, Baku-chan, can we talk for a second?" As Katsuki approached them, Sue had to acknowledge that he appeared even more dapper in this outfit than he did on stage. He looked great in the clothes and hairstyle. She kept it to herself for the time being because she wasn't sure if he would appreciate her opinion on his appearance. "Bakubro, great job not blowing up," she said, pressing her index finger to her lower lip as Eijiro smiled and lifted his fist for Katsuki to bump him. After a moment of staring at him with narrowed eyes, Katsuki said, "Anyway, thanks for coming." He even gave him a fist bump, appearing sufficiently irritated by it, and Sue covered her mouth to keep from laughing aloud. "You did really well," she said with a wide, joyful smile when Katsuki looked at her. "You sounded like the ideal #1 hero. That's how everyone who came today will report it." After his expression softened a little, he sighed and brushed his hair, ruining it almost instantly, before saying, "Thanks. It's only the beginning. I have a ton of interviews and media appearances coming up." In moments like these, she wished her expressionless face could convey her sympathy for his struggles more easily, but when she realized it couldn't, she just grinned and Eijiro gave him a shoulder pat, which clearly irritated Katsuki even more. When someone from his agency called him, he snapped back at the poor woman, saying, "Give me a minute." The woman winced. Knowing that Eijiro felt the same way, Sue said, "We don't want to keep you waiting." The redhead nodded beside her. "We just wanted you to have a few familiar faces in the crowd." She also meant it. She realized he truly wanted her there and made sure to switch shifts so she could make it when he texted her to say she could show up if she had a day off and was bored. The woman behind him appeared a little anxious that he wasn't looking at her and that she would have to call out to him again, while the ash blonde watched her for a moment. But the ash blonde moved closer to the sea green-haired heroine, protecting her from Eijiro and the others, before Sue could call attention to it. She blinked in surprise, but she accepted the gesture and unknowingly placed her hand on his arm. "I already spoke with." Katsuki suddenly stopped talking, narrowed his eyes, and furrowed his eyebrows, indicating that he was upset, but not as aggressively as he usually did when he was angry. His red eyes remained fixed on her behind her dark sunglasses, as if he didn't notice either. "Put those down for a sec. Not being able to see your eyes while we're conversing feels incredibly strange." Hearing him say that startled her. However, as she set them down, she couldn't help but smile to herself. She couldn't help feeling happy about it because it was the first time they had seen each other since their night out. Even though it was a part of their lives and jobs, she couldn't help but feel something close to anguish over the fact that they wouldn't be able to hang out as much now that he was officially the #1 hero. Sue already believed she was losing a lot of people because of her hectic schedule, and it felt like she had just gotten Katsuki and would soon be losing him. Katsuki smiled again as her narrowed eyes met hers and softened slightly. It was his version of a friendlier look, she realized. "I've already had conversations with the Hero Association and All Might. Regarding funding for your project, they will give you a call tomorrow." Surprised. Sue's dark eyes widened. After spending time with Katsuki last week, she made the decision to devise a more effective strategy to support her kids at the beach initiative. She couldn't bring herself to give up just yet, and the ash blonde hero reminded her why she was so committed to it. After hearing his compliments, she also felt a little more assured. She had a lot of supporters, and Sue never lacked confidence because she always took pride in knowing her strengths and weaknesses. But it meant a lot to have someone as talented and well-known as Katsuki tell her that she was doing the right thing, not to mention the plan to support her and help her when he became #1 hero. If she asked, Deku would also assist her, but Sue never felt like it because of how busy he always appeared to be. This also applied to Ochako. He would do this for her so fast that she was just taken by surprise, particularly while he was juggling everything. Bibaku-chan, I thank you. She had the strongest desire to give him a hug after what had transpired at the bar, but she decided against it as her lips formed a wide smile. Thank you, she said with a sigh and a nod. Kiro, it means a lot. His face mostly became bewildered. Did he sense that she wanted to give him a hug? Yeah, don't worry about it, Katsuki said, demonstrating his ability to read body language despite his apparent ignorance or failure to notice things that didn't matter to him. Bakugo-san. He reminded the woman. I said give me a minute, and Sue couldn't resist putting his hand in hers. Thank you, Baku-chan, he said. Just as someone yelled and a door opened, she felt him briefly squeeze her hand back. Sue's instincts took over, and she swiftly tore her hand from his, ideally before the trespassers could record or take photos. They exchanged glances as Katsuki's agency staff began to deal with the renegade journalists and tried to extricate them. She gave him one last grin in the hopes that it would uplift and sustain him for the time being. Then she approached Eijiro, who was staring at her with his brows raised and a faint smile on his face. Kiro, would you like to go together? She asked, and he blinked, looking over her head with a suspicious expression that told her right away that something was wrong. Yes. Sue felt somewhat self-aware now and didn't turn around. Even without rashly hugging the ash-blonde hero, she waved goodbye to Katsuki's parents, noting that they also exchanged a glance, which gave her a strange feeling that she might have done something wrong. Eijiro-chan, is everything okay? She felt compelled to inquire. Yes, don't be concerned about it. They like you, she told her redhead, grinning broadly, and she grinned back. Perhaps she was just overanalyzing everything, and it was nothing. Since Izuku's announcement was such big news, her phone was ringing with notifications all the way home. She was tagged and featured in multiple pictures alongside Eijiro and Katsuki's parents, demonstrating how ineffective her disguise was. Nobody really questioned her presence that day because the news was so widely publicized. Nevertheless, she anticipated that rumors would soon begin as everyone would attempt to learn more about Katsuki's life. Before going to bed that night, she discovered a text message from the ash blonde. Bakugo Katsuki, Froggy, thanks for coming. I told you not to thank for such things, Baku-chan, she said, smiling to herself. Bakugo Katsuki. Thank you very much for that as well. I can't get my old hag to stop calling me that now. Just before she went to sleep, she turned off her lights and wished him luck and good night. She couldn't help but think it was odd that, in spite of his mother's taunting, Katsuki didn't ask Sue to stop referring to him by the unique nickname. Baku-chan. I know you like it in secret. Numerous items related to the hero or the potential implications for the future have been featured in the media since Katsuki was announced as Japan's new #1. For the first few days, the news was largely factual or positive. Sue occasionally checked social media whenever she had a moment to spare and was relieved that Katsuki's reputation was unharmed and that the news was well received. However, she assumed that the positive and constructive approach grew stale, and soon a lot of unfavorable views began to surface. The majority of them came from private citizens, as well as less serious tabloids and media. Nevertheless, every time she texted Katsuki, she could tell it bothered him. She offered to help, but he had not yet accepted her offer and discussed it, saying his agency was taking care of it. Like many of her co-workers, she also wrote a lengthy, heartfelt, and encouraging congratulation on becoming the #1 hero. The photo of them from the Hero Association announcement was connected to that. However, it was promptly dismissed and forgotten as a feeble attempt at a rumor because, as Sue had hoped, they only managed to catch the two of them staring toward the cameras with a distance between them and no physical contact. Unless you watched the interview a few months ago, it was a little unexpected to find out that they were close friends, but it would be crazy for them to be dating. Was the most popular remark beneath the image, and Sue had to make herself believe it was positive. The sea green-haired heroine couldn't help but feel offended that someone would think she and Katsuki were too good for one another, even though it shouldn't matter and typically didn't matter what other people thought. Even though they were platonic, they clicked and enjoyed each other's company because they were both reasonably attractive and had feelings. For some reason, she didn't like the way they presented it. On the rare occasion that she was able to call her while Deku was bathing Nagi, Ochako reassured her, "You shouldn't let them get under your skin, Su-chan. Remember? Regarding Izuku and my relationship, a lot of people had strong opinions." During the video chat, Su gave her friend a smile. Although she was appreciative that she took the time to listen to her difficulties and try to assist, Su actually didn't see the two situations as being the same. In Ochako's case, the public was concerned that if Deku was in a relationship or had a family, he wouldn't fulfill his obligations to the best of his abilities. Something that, while less disastrous, turned out to be partially true. With Nagi, the public's affection for the two rays of sunshine grew even more. As everyone could see, Deku's reputation as a family man hero brought him a lot of positive publicity, so Katsuki was right to be concerned. In Su's case, the majority of people disapprove of her and Katsuki's relationship because they think he is a bad boy who will corrupt her and because they think her appearance is inferior to Katsuki's. But Ochako did let her friend vent, and when Izuku called Ochako, upset that he and Nagi had spilled water everywhere, she ended the call cheerfully. Su felt her entire body giving up on her after work, and she feared that was the last happy moment of the day. After working non-stop during an explosives-related ship heist, she was unable to complete the final 5 flights of stairs because her weak body was just wanting to rest, even though she was able to write a report on the event afterwards, change, and drive home. 1 floor away, she told herself, just a little bit more. She halted and blinked in confusion as she reached the top of her stairs, asking, "Baku-chan?" Finally, said the ash blonde, who was sitting on the floor with his back to her door, browsing through his phone. "Froggy, where in hell have you been?" Su couldn't speak as she reread the messages from the previous 2 days in her head, trying to recall whether she and Katsuki had scheduled a meeting for today. She came out empty-handed, though, saying, "I was at work. There were bombs, Kiro, and we were in a crisis." "Why are you here, Baku-chan?" she asked, realizing that she had never really told him where she lived as the new #1 hero slowly got to her feet. "And how did you find out my residence?" "I asked Cheeks why you weren't answering your phone," he said, crossing his arms. "Now, why in the world weren't you answering your phone?" he asked angrily, but Su was too exhausted to make fun of him tonight. "It was a difficult day today," she said as she approached her door slowly. "After taking a bath, I wanted to review my messages." She began to unlock her door without giving him a proper glance, but she caught a glimpse of his slightly relaxed posture out of the corner of her eye. And when she did look at him, she could see that his eyebrows had softened, softening his face. "Shitty day." Before pointing to his face, Su said, "Just tough. You know, if you manage the look you have on your face right now, I'm sure the public wouldn't have a single bad thing to say about you, Kiro," she said. "It's not possible," Katsuki said, blinking. "Do you currently possess it? And I've seen it on you quite a bit before?" With a sudden palm to her head, he said, "That's because you're not an annoying dumbass. At least when you're not being a dumbass who doesn't check her messages and worries her friends or whatever," Su thought, despite the fact that he wasn't grinning, because his face and eyes were so gentle and serene. Katsuki removed his palm, leaving Su momentarily stunned, but she was too taken aback by the gesture to fully appreciate it. Even though she was extremely tired, she finally smiled at him and said, "I appreciate your concern, Baku-chan." At last, she unlocked the door. She opened the door and let the ash blonde in, saying, "Come in, Kiro." She realized it was the first time since she had moved that she had had another hero over. Since Ochako was too preoccupied with the infant, it seemed more sensible to pay her a visit at her and Deku's house. She didn't even have time or the desire to throw a small party at her new house with her friends. Her family came to help her move and look around. Everyone was always busy, too. "Did something happen?" they asked, setting out her guest and home shoes for Katsuki to put on before she entered. Katsuki muttered, "Yeah, you didn't answer your useless phone," and Su couldn't help but smile a little because she could tell he was worried. "I appreciate you coming to see how I'm doing, Baku-chan." "Thank you," she said, putting her suit and bag in the laundry. "Please take a seat. Is there anything I can get you?" "No," he sighed and turned to her. "Look," he said, frowning, his red eyes. "Your hair looks gross." "I only took a quick shower in the agency to avoid getting sweaty in the car, but I plan to take a bath at home," she sighed and joked, always so tactful. "Here, I have unique hair products." After observing her for a moment, the ash blonde crossed his arms and said, "All right, enjoy your priceless bath. I'll wait." Surprised by the thought, Sue blinked and said, "Oh, that's okay. Kiro, it can wait." "It can't," he argued adamantly, "because you look like you need it and your hair is really strange like this." "You're oddly sweet, Baku-chan." "All right," she said, smiling even though she knew it must have looked more like a grimace due to how sore her body felt. Particularly when you don't make an effort to be. So he grabbed her arm and rolled his eyes at her, saying, "Just go." Although his nudge was gentle, it was an obvious indication that he wanted her to take a bath right away. Sue was thankful since she would have to pretend to be a good hostess for as long as he was there, even though she was in a lot of pain. "Feel free to switch on the television. Or use my computer," she said, although she had a sneaking suspicion he wouldn't do either. Regardless of what people said, Katsuki was very respectful and brought up correctly in terms of house etiquette. Hard pass. He looked toward her kitchen and said, "I've had enough of both of those shits and my phone for a lifetime. Did you come here right after work?" he asked. "Yes." Confused as to what he might mean, she confirmed, but he remained silent. Sue chose to simply take a bath and call it a day since she had nothing more to say. When she thought about taking a warm bath with her special ointment, soups, and shampoo, her body temporarily forgot how sore it was. Her not-so-clever mind didn't realize until she was inside that Katsuki had never explained his purpose for being there. Was he interested in hanging out? She thought someone like him would prefer that she invite him rather than invite him herself, so she frequently texted him that she was available for a chat if he wanted to. With all this bad boy appearance, he could easily become a little anxious and insecure. Perhaps he was simply concerned about her when she didn't pick up her phone and he watched to see how she was doing. He only chose to stay after realizing how bad things were. Sue tried to be quick about it anyway. The ash blonde shouldn't have to be left alone in her home like that, with nothing to do. Nevertheless, she groaned in satisfaction as her body entered the warm water. She closed her eyes and nearly fell asleep. This would not be the first time she woke up to discover herself in her cold bath. But now that she had a visitor in her house, she knew she couldn't afford to do so. She followed her routine, telling herself that she would still have time to take a longer bath before work tomorrow if she so desired, and she emerged from her bathroom nearly 40 minutes later. Katsuki was still there, but she was shocked that he didn't stay in the living room as she left while still wearing her big, fluffy green bathrobe. Rather, he was in her kitchen finishing a Courage chicken with rice when the sea green-haired heroine discovered him. "Huh? Have you finished soaking yourself at last?" "Great," said the ash blonde, who was filling their bowls while moving next to her tiny kitchen counter while wearing a frog-shaped apron. He paused for a moment when his red eyes met hers, making Sue question whether it would be wise to not get dressed before she went to look for him. It wasn't like he could see anything because her long robe covered her entire body, but perhaps the whole thing was a little too risque and premature for their new friendship. "You cooked? You said you came here right after work, and that it was a tough day, so you didn't have time for dinner," he said, blinking and chasing away whatever he was thinking before turning back to the identical bowls he was decorating because there was no other way to name it with the food he prepared. "I thought you could eat." "That's really kind of you," she said, forgetting the awkwardness she had caused with her robe as a wave of sentimental warmth swept through her body. She meant it. She hopes that more people will recognize this aspect of Bakugo Katsuki and realize that he deserves their respect and encouragement. She could see the faint smirk at the corner of his lips even though he didn't turn to face her. "Whatever. For defrauding me of that bar bill, I still fucking owe you." When she heard that, she smiled and said, "I didn't defraud you of anything. Kiro, I invited you." He argued, "I make more money than you," and since she was unable to respond, she chose to say, "Okay, let me just put on some clothes, and I'll be back in a bit." In order to avoid embarrassing herself in front of them both again, she went out and did just that, making sure to wear a bra even when she was at home. They began eating after Katsuki placed everything on her table when she arrived in the kitchen. Sue hadn't eaten a proper meal with anyone other than her family or coworkers while on patrol for a long time. The fact that someone else was preparing something especially for her made it even less so. "So good," she groaned softly, truly amazed at how delicious it was. "Baku-chan, you're really talented." He tried to dismiss it, saying, yeah, whatever, but Sue could see right through it and took pleasure in the smirk that was spreading across his lips and the obvious pride that was shining behind his eyes. As they ate, they talked a little about the various foods they liked and how bad it was that their hectic schedules didn't allow them to cook more. The ease and naturalness of the conversation this time didn't even surprise Sue. Being around Katsuki was pleasant. Despite their differences, they had many things in common. Katsuki's harsh, no bullshit honesty complemented Sue's candor and directness quite nicely. Listen, as nice as this is, I didn't really come here just to hang out, Katsuki said soberly as she went to wash them after they were finished. When Sue realized how serious the situation was, she paused and turned back to face him at the table. What's going on? She asked. A lot of losers with too much time on their hands started to send me shit and attempt to start to shit up with old pictures or rumors from a couple of years, he said, appearing uncertain for a moment before he took out his phone. All right, Sue said, encouraging him to continue. Now that Katsuki was even more well-known than he had been before, she assumed that would be the case. Being the #1 hero came with a lot more pressure. Before he looked at her, he must have found what he was looking for on his phone. One of those losers sent my agency this. The sea green-haired woman knew what she would find on his phone before he even turned it for her to see. She was correct. A surprisingly high-quality photo of her and him sharing a kiss in the middle of a bar with blurry faces surrounding them was on Katsuki's phone. Nevertheless, her heart fell. They're kind of blackmailing me. Only the amount I would be willing to pay to have this vanish was mentioned in the message that included the picture. Katsuki, I'm so sorry, she said, looking at the ash blonde, possibly for the first time in her life, with true self-hatred over what she had done because she knew this had an impact on someone else. Once more, her gaze fell on the picture. I'll pay them, was an irrational decision that naturally backfired. He said, that's my line, and then he touched her arm. Despite her poor decision that evening, Katsuki clearly didn't despise her, so the gesture gave her endless comfort. I told you not to apologize, Froggy. He looked sincere and gentle as he said, I know why you did it, and trust me, to have those assholes see me leave with you with their envious eyes was fucking worthy. Good, she even managed to laugh. It was satisfying to startle everyone in that way. It was accurate. She didn't really want to take back the sense of empowerment the kiss gave her, even though she wished she had given it more thought. Not to mention that even after their lips parted, the kiss was satisfying and left a tingling feeling. Even though Sue wouldn't tell the ash blonde that she had dated a few good kissers because it would be awkward, Katsuki might as well be her best friend. Anyway, he contacted my agency, so if you want, I'll pay him off, he said, clearing his throat and putting his hand away while clenching. I don't want you to use your money, Kiro, Sue said with a slight frown, not liking the idea. I made the error and... Froggy, I earn more money than you do. For a quick kiss, I'm not going to let you waste it on some jerk. With his red eyes solemn but assured, he remarked, I managed to knock out a villain's teeth in a shot that was worse than this. Wait. So you're not worried about what it might do to your reputation? She blinked, recognizing something. Shit, you must be tired to be this dense, Sue-chan. The ash blonde laughed at that. No, Froggy, he said, settling down and letting out a sigh with an oddly composed expression. I'm not concerned about the potential damage to my reputation from a quick kiss with a gorgeous coworker. I'm concerned about what might happen to your lips if a bad boy like me kisses you while intoxicated in a bar. You project an image of a clever, stylish, and adorable heroine. They will accuse you of being corrupt when they witness you making out with someone like me. You'll lose the smart, well-respected, tough, and courteous good girl persona you've worked so hard to establish and gain the right to be regarded as a heroine. Stunned by his words, she opened and closed her mouth before turning back to the picture. When she took that chance and gave him that public kiss, she wasn't really considering the repercussions. The double standard of being a female hero in Japan was something she was all too familiar with. The fact that it still occurred today was foolish. This right here made it impossible for her to ever succeed without causing some sort of annoyance to someone, if there was anything in her life that she detested. Logically, it might be preferable to remove the entire mess. Erasing this and allowing them to continue living their lives as they have up until now would be better for them both. Sue recognized that and even thought it was a more sensible option than the other. However, for some reason, she kept feeling angry about the entire situation, saying, "This is bullshit. Damn, I must be rubbing off on you already," she said, raising Katsuki's eyebrows in surprise. For a second, something glistened behind his eyes. If it were anyone else, people wouldn't bat an eye about something like this. Just speculating if we're dating and how long, she said, too worked out to take a more serious look at it. However, it's significant because it's someone like you and me. A bad boy is not you. You're who you are. You swear far too much and have a loud mouth. Nevertheless, she told him, you deserve to be #1 because you're a great hero who has dedicated your entire life to this. And I'm not a saint, you know? She added, almost grinning at how much she believed it. I understand that since I'm courteous and try to resolve conflicts rather than start them, I earned this good girl's reputation, but I'm not some naive, flower, hero, virgin just because my romantic life isn't publicly displayed online. She looked at him tensely, as if she were trying to figure out how to handle this whole situation. She acknowledged that kissing Katsuki in that way was a mistake, but she refused to retract it for reasons other than her own. Tell me, if it were up to you, would you pay them? Sue, this isn't about me, he argued, scowling once more. How about Katsuki? She asked, preventing him from getting away with it too soon. She already knew the answer, but she needed him to say it out loud. She could see his jaw clenching and his lips pressing into a tight line before he finally said, "No, Sue, I wouldn't pay a fucking pussy blackmailer shit," with a tiny sigh that betrayed his defeat. I never give them money. Since it's usually never as bad as they make it out to be, I let them run whatever they want. It either works out or is quickly forgotten. Because you're a good person, and people can see that even if they're tempted by rumors and media, Sue said with a smile, feeling hopeful about her choice, and placed her palm over his hand on the table. Touching him to comfort him felt so natural, and she wondered if he noticed. Don't pay them because of me, and I won't either, she said. I wanted to show all those people who were talking trash about us that I was serious when I kissed you. After observing her face for a while, Katsuki laughed and softened his face once more. Well, congrats, Froggy, he said. You fucking showed them, and you'll show the rest of Japan. And possibly the entire world. In a few days. I'll have to deal with that when it comes to it, Sue said, biting the inside of her mouth. If you're positive you don't mind being associated with someone like me. He dismissed her feeble attempts at self-insecurity by rolling his eyes and saying, Shut up, I would be fucking lucky to be linked to someone like you for a change. Most of the women I got involved with didn't exactly paint me in the best picture. Although she wasn't stalking him, Sue titled her head, thinking for a moment, True, you have a specific type. It seemed like the media went to great lengths to extract every picture of him with a female companion since his hero debut. No, he protested, and she looked at him and said, Yes, you do. You are frequently photographed. Yes, those women want to be photographed, so they were. Sue laughed and said, Nice save. I don't just go for models and media who girls, he corrected himself. All right, he moaned and combed his hair slightly, reminding Sue that it didn't look the same as when they last met, when he was so well groomed and dressed. By the way. He gave her another look. You looked fantastic that day, Sue said with a smile. Kiro, you're very attractive and professional. After observing her for a while with an odd expression behind his crimson eyes, the ash blonde laughed and shook his head, saying, Whatever. At least in Sue's modest view, he appeared to be quite happy about it. Later, Sue informed him that she would contact her agency tonight in order to get ready for Katsuki's agency to leak the picture of their kiss tomorrow evening. Instead of being stuck on a mission where everyone would try to call or reach her in some other way, it would buy them some time and allow her to return home before the whole mess. Your hair looks pretty again, Katsuki said by the door as he put on his shoes, carefully avoiding eye contact. Sue's dark eyes widened briefly before she smiled at his back. I'm grateful, Katsuki. You are more adept at expressing gratitude and compliments, aren't you? She felt compelled to inquire. He gave her a glare and snapped, Zip it, but she was long past being sensitive to those. He grabbed the door handle so he could safely leave her apartment. She couldn't resist putting her arms around his neck and giving him a hug, if only briefly, so she could smell the nitroglycerin and whatever pricey cologne he was wearing. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, and even the sea-green-haired heroine felt a little uncomfortable with Katsuki's arms by his side. When the number one hero finally gave her a hug in return, he rubbed her skin with one palm against her shoulder blades and squeezed her still wet hair with the other. It was pleasant. Typically, Sue received quick, friendly pats on the back or squeezes from men. Then, on a few occasions, she had men try to reach to her lower back and even lower. Katsuki's hug was unlike any she had ever experienced. She couldn't help but think it was a nice surprise when he gave her this hug because she knew he wasn't touchy or an embracer at all. It was as cozy and secure as it had been at the bar that evening. It felt really good to have him hold her like this, especially after how difficult her day had been and how she was still feeling guilty about the publicity her carelessness would create tomorrow night. Sue could picture herself dozing off from the comforting sensation of being held by someone larger and cozier than herself if he didn't release her when he did. Night, Sue-chan. Katsuki's face was unreadable when they parted, as if it had been the night at the bar, but the expression behind his eyes conveyed tenderness. Good night, Katsuki, she said, giving him one last grin. Though it would feel so much better if her agency didn't react the way they had, Sue knew the following day that she had made the right choice. In contrast to Katsuki and a few other heroes who were the only heroes in their agencies, Sue's agency had a number of heroes. As a result, Sue was perplexed by their apparent anger over her predicament. Yes, she made a mistake, but compared to some of her coworkers, it felt unfair that they were criticizing her in this way when this was the first time she had ever experienced such a problem. Perhaps it was just her nervousness and tension over the upcoming picture. Nevertheless, she felt that even her own agency was treating her more like her hero than like a unique individual. Whether she was emotional or irrational, the heroine truly believed she was being mistreated. She was aware of the repercussions and that kissing a coworker in public while intoxicated didn't look good. But, like the people in the bar who said she should know better than to hang out with someone like Katsuki, the agency responded with much greater scandal. She was furious, but she didn't object when they told her to take a day off. Before continuing to work on her Kids at the Beach project, she just stayed at home and took an hour-and-a-half long bath, even though it didn't really satisfy her. She still had a lot to do despite the Japan Hero Association's tremendous assistance, which was made possible by Katsuki's financial assistance. This included both practical work and media attention. She has done well on the work portion thus far. However, none of the radio stations, internet newspapers, or television programs she contacted seemed particularly interested in the project, so the media seemed to be a dead end. She had been dealing with media attention for months, only receiving a respectable moment for the project during the notorious interview, so this wasn't new. She was certain that the kiss photo must have been making the rounds on the internet before the evening hours. For several hours now, her phone was exploding with notifications, calls, and messages. She did, however, take care to avoid answering the majority of her friends' and family's calls because she didn't want to experience the same thing that happened with her agency. At some point during the day, practically everyone she knew made an attempt to get in touch with her. But Katsuki, she thought, and then she remembered that he was still at work. However, the fact made her stop and wonder why, if they both agreed to do it after they were off their patrols to avoid exposure, his agency released the photo so early. Due to the numerous appearances and interviews he had to make after becoming the #1 hero, Katsuki was only able to return to work today. After some internal deliberation, Sue texted him to ask him to write her when he had some free time. Before her curiosity overcame her and she grabbed her phone once more, she worked on the project for a solid hour more. Katsuki is still absent. But when her best friend Ochako texted her for the 20th time, the heroine with the sea green hair felt sorry for her and checked her messages. Except for the final one, the first ones appeared to have been written as soon as Ochako saw the picture and were mostly written in a startled tone requesting that Sue call her or write her back. All you had to do was tell me you were seeing someone. Despite what I've said about him, I don't think he's all that horrible. I swear, please give me a call when you can. I wish you luck. After that, Sue's heart was somewhat warmed by a string of adorable emojis. She made the decision to at least text Ochako, her parents, and her siblings to let them know she was okay but that she needed some time to get in touch. Sue wasn't confident enough to text them to tell them that it wasn't like that and that she and Katsuki were just sharing a drunken kiss rather than dating. She went through some of the messages from the people who mattered most in her life, thinking, I would feel more in control if my agency reacted better. Then she saw an email from one of the stations she contacted about appearing on a radio show. For the first time in months, the email appeared promising enough, giving Sue hope. The woman who contacted her took the time to read about Sue's project and offer suggestions for topics that would be a good focus of the radio show. However, Sue was perplexed when the woman asked if Sue could also discuss her and Katsuki briefly. She said, "Pity," and put her phone away. The following few hours were incredibly draining as she tried to find something to occupy her time while avoiding the calls and texts. At the same time, she continued to receive no calls or texts from Katsuki. She texted him to ask him to let her know if he was okay. Not yet worried but maybe concerned, she made an effort to stay off the internet out of concern that she wouldn't appreciate the attention and comments the picture would receive. But she was powerless to stop herself when another hour passed and Katsuki was still missing. Sue tried to keep her head above the surface, making sure there was no news of him getting hurt or some major crisis. She found a ton of news despite her and Katsuki's covert relationship being revealed, but she was unable to find anything similar. Well, she told herself, we did anticipate this. Her gaze strayed a little through the news, but she didn't want to add to her stress by thinking more pessimistic thoughts. She ought to have shut down the page and put her phone away, but the more Sue scrolled, the more it appeared that the headlines about Bakugo Katsuki and Asui Suyu's secret relationship confirmed were more like verified facts than rumors or conjecture. After considering the advantages and disadvantages, she made the decision to quickly snoop around and discovered the original photo along with a statement from Katsuki's agency verifying her and Katsuki's relationship. As she stared at the picture she had been aware of since last night and the startling information she was completely unaware of, her eyes widened and she let out a loud gasp inside her peaceful apartment. She tried to think, telling herself that couldn't be true. Even though she couldn't recall every detail of their conversation, she was positive they didn't agree to say they were dating because she was so tired yesterday and wanted to go to sleep right away. It's probably just a misunderstanding, Sue said, taking a deep breath before opening her eyes again to read the phone's large caption. Avoid being foolish. Katsuki agreed to lie about you two dating, but why? What? She asked herself. No, she didn't think he would. If such an incident occurred, someone else made a mistake. After that, she attempted to call his number, but it went to voicemail. Even though Sue wasn't a proud person, their actions that morning required some persuasion and logic before she called her own agency. A few hours ago, Bakugo-san's agency published the announcement along with the picture. We got in touch with them after our call. The man in charge of her agency's media relations said, I apologize, Asui-san. You made it seem like you and Bakugo-san. Well, it doesn't matter. I apologize for what I said, and I hope we can discuss how we can use this to further promote your image in the near future. Hearing that, Sue furrowed her brows and asked, what do you mean? She didn't harbor resentment. Everyone made mistakes. What mattered was that they truly felt bad about what they had done. But she couldn't deny that the agency's unsupportive actions when she needed their assistance damaged and undermined her confidence and feelings. It's no secret that Bakugo-san is the new #1 hero, and that having this title has improved and greatly increased the popularity of the person who holds it among their partners and family. The man explained, if nothing else, it will definitely give you the momentum and attention to speak more about your project. She only did not point out how foolish it was that she had been a hero for so long and that the only reason she would get a good project that might help a lot of kids and environment up and running was because she was still upset with him and he mentioned the project. Since she couldn't stay at home like this, she ended the call with some polite greetings and went to change. She might not have known Katsuki's residence or felt comfortable calling someone about it given her circumstances. Nevertheless, she was aware of the location of his agency and cheerfully went there, wearing a hat and sunglasses on top and a scarf over her lower mouth. She was surprised to see how crammed the building's exterior would be. Reporters appeared to be trying to get an interview and photos of Katsuki even days after he became the #1 hero, as though he were a superhero who had revealed his secret identity. As she noticed more people contacting her about her project through texts, voicemails, and emails, she briefly considered her options. Even though she was aware of how it operated, she couldn't help but feel awful because she knew that her relationship with the #1 hero was the only thing that made the project so fascinating. She wanted to give Katsuki another call. Nevertheless, Sue had enough and used her disguise to get past the crowd and into the building when she was once more met with nothing but the sound of his voicemail. She found Katsuki quickly, even though she was never there. How on earth were you able to accomplish this? She was too much reminded of their UA by the yelling. Days and escorted her straight into an office where a number of staff members, some of whom Sue had known since Katsuki's debut as the #1 hero, were cowering or trying to calm the hero down as he yelled at them. "Who the fuck gave this authorization? Because I'm positive that I didn't. Running it that way was not your right. Are you aware of what you really fucking did?" Although the shouting was unpleasant, Sue could understand that Katsuki had not anticipated this result because it was coherent. Even though she believed Katsuki was much more adept at managing his rage than people realized, she didn't think he could withstand his staff's feeble attempts to justify their actions. She sighed and set her scarf and glasses down. "Baku-chan," she said, placing her hand over his biceps and observing that he was still covered in ash, likely having just returned from a patrol without even taking off his hero suit. The ash blonde took a moment to turn to her, but his shouting stopped almost instantly. He clenched his jaw so tightly that she thought he might break it, and his red eyes were blazing with anger. Just looking at him made her heart race, and she wondered if it was the hero instinct telling her to be on guard. Even though she knew it wasn't aimed at her, Katsuki's gaze never left hers, and she felt her cheeks getting warmer for some reason when he gazed at her so angrily. "Leave us," she said, glancing at the individuals behind his back. In a matter of seconds, the entire office was empty without her even having to yell or say, "Please." Even though Katsuki's face still gave the impression that he was about to bite someone's head off, his body relaxed under Sue's palm. "Breathe, okay?" Red eyes stared at her for a very long time, and she didn't feel like she could breathe again or feel her heart slow down until they closed and he took a deep breath. "I don't know who fucked up just yet," he said, turning his head away from her. "However, I fucking promise to track them down and fire them immediately." Sue was unsure of how to respond to that. She would simply advise that person to publicly correct the record and offer an apology if it was an honest error. She didn't think it was deliberate. Really? Why would someone try to get her and Katsuki together? "I tried calling you, Kiro," she said at last. He answered tensely. "I turned off my phone when my old hag started abusing my number like crazy." She grabbed his palm in an attempt to lift his spirits, but he tore it away, saying, "Don't." Then, as he clenched his fists to conceal them from her, his voice became much quieter. As if he were attempting to shield her from them, from himself. "I'm too upset," he admitted with a tense and feeble voice. She nodded when she realized he was referring to his peculiarity and how the sweat used it. "All right, how about dinner, Kiro?" she asked. "Perhaps I could prepare a meal for you this time." He said, "I can't," and she attempted to ignore her disappointment in order to better comprehend him. "Why not?" "I need to track down the idiot who made a mistake. Ensure that he receives what is rightfully his." Sue understood his point of view as he grunted, "I've been a pro hero for almost 10 years, and this fucking never happened better, and the minute I make number one, shit like this isn't supposed to happen in an agency like mine." She acknowledged, "It does seem like a rookie mistake," but as soon as she did, she saw Katsuki's face light up. "And I'm sure you'll give that person a piece of your mind tomorrow just as much as you would today, Kiro," she continued after waiting for nothing more. Sue hoped the words would cause the red eyes that were narrowed and diabolical to widen and clear a bit. "But you worked a lot and are obviously upset and, I am too," she said. "There was no manipulation involved. And I can't really talk about this with anyone, but you, Katsuki," she said, expressing her deep distress and wishing she could speak with Katsuki one-on-one like they did yesterday, at the bar, and following the interview. He took a step closer to her and snatched her arms between his hands, and she could tell he was beginning to realize it wasn't just about him based on the look on her face. "I'll fix it, Sue," he said, forgetting his quirk and perspiration. "I swear." Even though he was angry and probably shaken by it all, he sounded and looked incredibly sincere. Now that he appeared less irate with those around him, Sue couldn't help but smile at him and say, "I believe you, Baku-chan. Now, would you mind coming home with me for dinner?" He nodded and went to the door, so she wondered if he knew it was a bit of a dirty tactic, but if he did, he let her. Sue would assume that some workers would want to listen in. However, it appeared that Katsuki was too frightening for that. He changed his clothes and took a very brief shower. With the exception of the publicist, a nice-looking man Sue had seen a few days prior, it appeared that everyone knew better than to obstruct him. "Asui-san, is that right?" The man looked around anxiously as she nodded. Feeling somewhat self-aware, she corrected herself. "Bakugo is in the showers." With everything going on, she referred to him by a nickname, and the man exhaled a sigh of relief, saying, "Good. Taking a cold shower usually helps. I appreciate your support during this entire situation and for helping to calm him down earlier." Sue gave a nod. She didn't know who was to blame for Katsuki and her being officially recognized as a couple in their current state. She couldn't, however, vent her anger on an elderly man who had such a kind appearance. "I hope I'm not going too far, but I have something to talk to you about," he said, clearing his throat. "It's crucial." "What is it?" They said as they heard a distant sound of someone slapping their locker. The man swiftly produced his card and gave it to her, saying, "Please give me a call before you make any decisions. At any moment. I would like to talk to you about something." Only because the man looked so anxious and Sue saw him flee as Katsuki was getting out did Sue accept the card. He grunted, "Let's go," but she stopped him and pointed out the card, saying, "I got it from your publicist." Katsuki gave the poor piece of paper his demon glare as soon as she said it. Before he took a few irate breaths and grunted once more, the pro-heroine pondered whether he would blow it up between her fingers. "Let's just go," she said. They were gone this morning, they said, using Sue's camouflage to exit the building and enter her vehicle. She blinked at him with her dark eyes. As they rode to her place, Katsuki was holding on to the handle at her passenger's door much too tightly. "They showed up right after that stupid announcement from my agency," she said. "Stupid fools." "It makes sense," Sue said with a nod. "You are the #1 hero and have never dated anyone in public." Katsuki gave her a quick glance, but she didn't have the strength to turn around until a few minutes later, when he was already staring out her car's window. She almost regretted getting him in the first place because of how gloomy the atmosphere felt while they were driving in silence. Sue could tell he had taken a shower in his agency while she waited for him because of his slightly damp hair. "If you want a bath, I can run it for you," she said. Before she bit the inside of her mouth and said, "Or not," he gave her a look that nearly made her laugh at how terrified he appeared. "The living room is where you can wait." He quickly put an end to her notion that he was unwinding and helped her tie her apron without her having to ask, placing his hand on her hip. But she could tell he was simply deep in thought when she looked back at him. They finished their tendon in record time and sat down to a conversation that was very different from their previous one. "So what now? Whether the pussy who made the mistake comes clean or not, I'll take the blame myself," Katsuki sighed, appearing much more at ease now that he was eating, despite his shoulders tensing slightly as soon as she asked that question. "But, I am in charge of my agency." He sounded somewhat calm about the idea but tense about the whole thing. "If they screwed up, I'm the one to take most of the heat," he said. "Maybe I should start working for your agency," Sue said, not imagining that her agency would let her suffer the consequences of her errors if she were in such a situation. The ash blonde instantly frowned and stopped eating. "What did you say? You gave you shit, did you?" Working himself up once more, he asked, and the sea green-haired woman responded gratefully, "Not exactly. They expressed their disappointment with me clearly before they thought the kiss was just an inebriated error. It felt excessive, even though I know it was a fatal mistake for someone like me who ought to be better than that. When some of the other heroes in my agency made mistakes, I'm sure the lecture wasn't as antagonistic." "I can talk to my people," Katsuki said, scowling at his food. Even though it seemed to be over, Sue could still feel the tension and see it on Katsuki's shoulder as he seemed to be contemplating something. Suddenly, his eyes became slightly softer. The strangest thing ever came out of his mouth as he was still eating was, "Girlfriends usually tend to work for the same agencies as their boyfriends." The light blush and widening red eyes told Sue that Katsuki was about to lose it because she thought he had said something inappropriate. Sue opened and closed her mouth, but before he could, she started laughing, not at him, not to make fun of him, but at how ridiculous it was to hear him say that right then. "Cute," she smiled at him before adding, "but I believe those are husbands and wives, Kiro." As Katsuki appeared to calm down, he reprimanded and furrowed his brows slightly, asking, "What are you talking about?" She laughed. As Sue reflected on the past, Katsuki countered, "Deku and Ochako worked for the same agency for years before they were married." "No, it was more complicated than that," Katsuki said, taking another bite of his fried fish. "Because their agencies were so close, Izu-chan frequently asked Ocha-chan for help." "Yeah, that shy nerd wasn't fooling anyone with that shit," Katsuki said, rolling his eyes. "True, but it was sweet, isn't it?" Sue laughed once more, nearly spitting her food. They constantly tried to fit in some alone time because they didn't have much time for one another. Even years after they had worked out their differences, Katsuki continued to try to undermine Izuku by saying, he wasn't trying hard enough. He said, "I already saw you 3 times this week alone," which made her pause after she shook her head. "Yeah," Sue said, stopping her meal to press her index finger against her lower lip. After that, there was a brief silence. Realizing that it was true and that they had spent more time together this month, and in Sue's case, more time than she had with anyone else, was a little strange. "Look," she heard him say, and when she turned to face him, she saw that he was clearly in a panic and not eating. "Forget I said anything." Before he could say anything more, she quickly interrupted, saying, "Accidental girlfriends are different. They need more upkeep," she said, beaming at him as his red eyes met her dark ones. After observing her for a moment, he laughed and picked up the chopsticks once more. "I guess so," he said. "The last time I had dinner with a girl twice in a row is long gone." "Me either," Sue smiled. "That must be a little pitiful." "You're pitiful." He teased her, "I'm sticking to my eligible bachelor lifestyle," and she kicked him beneath the table in a childish manner. He hardly made any movement to show that she had touched him. They continued, but there was still room for improvement in the atmosphere. He clenched his fists at one point, appearing utterly frustrated yet oddly depressed. He began reluctantly, "I'm really sorry you ended up in this whole mess, Suyu," before eventually exiting. "You're not to blame, my agency, not your fault," she repeated in the hopes that he would hear her. She grabbed his fist and covered it with her hand when it didn't seem to work, saying, "You did everything right. Someone else is wearing this. And I respect your attempt to accept responsibility. Katsu-chan, you're a good boss and hero, and Kiro, a good friend." After observing her for a moment, The ash blonde let out a sigh and reached out to touch the nape of his neck. Besides, it wasn't too bad so far. In an attempt to calm him, she said, aside from the fact that the phone calls and messages were a little annoying, it wasn't a big deal. I received numerous offers for appearances and interviews regarding the kids at the beach project. I am aware that they all want to talk about you, or rather, us. But at least they spent the time researching it to try to convince me, she said, gesturing between them. She realized that she was being too honest and that it might have come out incorrectly after saying it aloud, as she had done a few times previously, particularly when Katsuki ignored her. It's lame, I know, and it's not like I would ever agree to them, she said, feeling her cheeks warm up. That this is what it took to get people interested in the project is just awful. He said, you should accept them, and Sue blinked, what? You should accept them, Katsuki said, his expression unreadable as he gazed at her. Attention should be paid to your project. Simply put, don't waste this opportunity. I don't understand, Sue was momentarily stunned, unsure of how to respond to that. You said that I was worthy of being the number one. That I merited it. You earned this, he said, gesturing to her table. Without you, there wouldn't be a project. He averted his gaze and said, you worked your ass off, Suyu. So why would they want to talk to you? It's okay as long as the project receives some attention. Your project is worthy of being highlighted. With it, you can accomplish a lot. After observing him for a moment, she couldn't resist smiling and grabbing his arm. She felt that she didn't need to just make sure he could see how she was beaming at him, so she remained silent. He glanced back at her and spent some time mapping her face with his eyes, but his appearance didn't really improve. Though she was aware that it had to do with their relationship announcement, she couldn't help but suspect there was more going on here. Baku-chan, she said, holding his arm, it's not that serious. You told me yesterday that a single drunken kiss wouldn't matter, so why is everything so different now? Someone made a mistake, you can fix it tomorrow. I believe my publicist sent me the picture and spread the word, Katsuki interrupted, leaving the table, clearly under stress. She got up as well and went with him. It wasn't like he could move around much because her apartment was cute and functional but not particularly roomy. The older man with the kind face, she asked herself as she considered the card and the elderly man who insisted he needed to speak with her. When he heard that, he grimaced, and Sue realized why he was trying to figure out what it all meant. Yeah. After that, she stood right behind him and waited for him to calm down. He has been on my case about how problematic my image is, she said. In order to gain the public's approval, he helped me clean it up a little over the years and arranged for me to make more public appearances. To appeal to everyone. He saw you and me and pointed at a few things after we declared me the #1 hero. What kind of things? Sue inquired, disapproving of Katsuki's tense back. Just stuff, bullshit about how I needed more time to talk about it, if he ever would, he snapped, and she understood. That a nice, unproblematic heroine like me might be good for your image? She asked. After a slight relaxation, he shrugged and said, more or less. Then came that fucking picture of us, and when we were discussing what to do, he asked me again that shit about you and whatever, he said, turning to look at her or through her because his eyes appeared agitated and distracted. In summary, he stated that it wouldn't be a bad thing for me to resemble Deku more on this. Before she moved closer, not touching him yet, but close enough for him to have to look down at her, Sue felt her entire being softened for the man. You know you don't have to be like Deku, right? He asked. You are aware that people love and respect you just the way you are. Baku-chan, we've already discussed this. Yeah, I know, he said with a grimace, it's really insecure of me to go into the same bullshit again. Having my publicist say that knowing everything I do is just fucking awful. It doesn't matter, she said, taking his hand in hers. It's only a picture, it doesn't improve us as people or heroes. Furthermore, it might not be worse for me if you like me. I could be seen as more than just a courteous mediator, at least. I did give you a kiss in a packed bar. Yeah, he said, pressing his palm to the top of her head once more. So fucking short. It still amazes me that you could have gotten in touch with me. Sue realized that lately, they had been very touchy. Nevertheless, she found it strange that she felt the ash blonde sorely needed physical contact that wasn't for fighting, and perhaps she did too. She laughed, then realized they had serious problems. All of that regarding your publicist sounds suspicious, but what about the picture from the bar? She sighed. He was the first one who showed it to me since he handled everything sent to the agency, he sighed, looking much more serious once more. He was always inquiring about you. I mean, it might be helpful to me if we were close and secretly dating. He made sure to look her in the eyes as he said, I shut it down, but it didn't matter because she would still believe him. But then this shit happened. I'm not sure, it's incredibly convenient. I understand, she said, nodding, but more than anything, he works for you and is loyal to you. She suggested, I'll wait it out, Kiro, unless you have proof, and observed him considering it. He finally said, yeah, but it sounded flimsy and unconvinced. Overall, the situation was disorganized. Sue was aware that the only thing they could do was wait until morning to correct the record. At least this won't hurt the person we're dating, right? Knowing she was correct, she asked. True, the ash blonde nodded. And if it draws attention to your project, it can't be all bad. My old hag will still be mad at me for this for months. She's trying to get you to give her grandkids. She laughed, recalling Bakugo Mitsuki and what little she knew about her encounter with Katsuki's mother. With no heat, he said, fuck off, and released her. Now that Izuku has the second one coming, it's going to be a nightmare. She's arranged blind dates for me once more, and shit. Again. Don't ask, Sue said, covering her mouth as she watched Katsuki return to the table. She was dying to hear about Bakugo Katsuki going on a blind date, so she pleaded, please. Next time, he said, but Sue wasn't sure he would follow through because it didn't sound like a commitment. Kiro, you're no fun. He gave her a look that made her heart race and her smile somewhat freeze. Believe me, Froggy, he was skilled at making self-assured women blush if he so desired. I can have a lot of fun. She went back to the table as well, though the giggle that escaped her throat sounded a little too nervous. They carried on eating and talking. While it was overwhelming, it also seemed almost unreal in the comfort of her apartment and kitchen. It almost seemed like a joke, and tomorrow she would go about her day like any other. No one was taking pictures or asking them questions. It appears that people stopped texting and calling her about it because her phone, which was on vibrate, seemed to quiet down. Did you check to see if it helped your image at least? She asked after a while. Not really, Katsuki said, blinking at her with a suitably shocked expression. I turned off my phone unless there was an urgent situation because my old hag was so angry that she yelled at me to tell her and shit. Additionally, I was too angry with my staff to listen to what they had to say. Thinking, she nodded and took another bite of her food. Would you like to read a portion of it? He asked, and they looked at each other, clearly thinking about the same thing, before they laughed and said, sure. He took out his phone and froze as she leaned closer to him. Is there something wrong? Sue blinked. Even though it was obvious that something was wrong, Katsuki swallowed a little and said, it's fine. Should I finally get the receiving end of Asui Suyu's rage? He asked after tapping into his phone several times as if he was trying to calm down. He must have discovered that she had been very keen to contact him as well after looking through his voicemails and text messages. She looked away, admitting that she felt oddly shy about it now, considering the situation. Nope, I just told you to call me when you could and that. I was worried and hoped you were fine, she said. After staring at her with his crimson eyes for a long moment, Katsuki gave her a small smile. He showed her his phone after opening a news app. At the top, a huge and captivating headline that read, New #1 hero couple unmasked, featured their kiss. Sue moaned as he opened the article. Of course, they had to pick that picture. It was the cursed swimsuit photo from a few years ago that brought her so much grief and attention, and it was right next to a picture of Katsuki looking up at himself while wearing his hero suit in the sunlight shining through the ash clouds. How isn't that sexist? I'll have them take it down, she said, and even Katsuki moaned. Blinking, Sue said, you can do that. He used her prior status to say, your accidental boyfriend is the #1 hero, Froggy, which made her laugh. They briefly read the article. From then on, it became less terrible. Merely summarizing their accomplishments and life stories, the majority of which they were accurate. With much better images, the other online magazines followed suit. They went so far as to look through their old UA days, seemingly going overboard in their search for every single photo of the two of them together. Surprisingly, even nearly 30 minutes later, they were unable to locate any articles that weren't positive. That was strangely less awful than I feared, Kiro, she said. The majority of the comments were positive as well, with people saying things like, I'm shocked, I wish you well, it's obvious, and you should break up with me because I'm in love with you. Up until they discovered some pictures from the notorious interview from a few months ago where either Sue was speaking, they mainly talked and joked about some things that they did terribly wrong. Either Katsuki was the one talking to Sue and smiling kindly at him, or Katsuki was smirking at her in public. It was absurd. During the interview, it was just the two of them chatting and reminiscing about a past classmate. Nevertheless, it seemed oddly personal given the way those photos were shot and processed. Sue became acutely conscious of her proximity to Katsuki and the fact that he still smelled of nitroglycerin and the pricey cologne he must have kept in his agency locker, for the first time since they had looked at Katsuki's phone. She could feel his body warming up against hers, and she hoped that from this close, he wouldn't be able to see her cheeks getting hot or hear her heartbeat quicken. When she looked at him, he was staring at her with an odd expression on the back of his face. It's some silly pictures, she told herself. They were much closer than she had previously thought. Their closest encounter since. She thought, I kissed him, and her mind, as though it could remember Katsuki's lips touching hers, gave her a tingling sensation against her lips. For a brief moment, it appeared as though his eyes had dropped, and Sue found herself about to bend forward, thinking he would look at her mouth and she would give him another kiss. Instead, he took another look at his phone, which she realized with horror. His eyes widened for a moment, as though he had caught sight of something. She was even more startled when he abruptly slammed his phone against the table than when she thought he was going to look at her and instinctively leaned forward to give him another kiss. She glanced at the phone, but all she could see was its back. What a bunch of nonsense! Too loudly for the poor woman to hear, Katsuki yelled. At the same time, though, it helped shock her enough to let go of the odd moment. Sue licked her lips and got to her feet in an attempt to relax and gain some space. She had a difficult couple of days, and she acted instinctively when she thought Katsuki was staring at her mouth. She considered it for a moment. After all, she was a sensible, practical individual. She clearly thought Katsuki was attractive, but she was too busy to be in a committed relationship. To tell the truth, she enjoyed having the ash blonde as a friend too much to ruin it. She made up her mind without him knowing it. She made the decision to simply stay friends and steer clear of similar illogical thinking in the future. Calming down, she told herself, I'm probably just lonely, and our strong connection is messing with my head. Katsuki went to assist her after she publicly confessed, I expected more hate, while doing the dishes. Only then did Sue notice how homely and pleasant it appeared. Since everyone, including herself, had busy lives, she had been alone for some time and didn't have many people in her life. She shared a room with her younger sister when she was younger, and she later attended the UA living in dorms, surrounded by her friends and classmates all the time. After graduating, she briefly lived with Ochako before moving in with another former coworker when Ochako moved in with Deku. Even though Sue had her own room and everything, she was never truly alone. A few brief partners here and there helped. Eating lunch, talking, going out, and spending time with Katsuki. Everything was so beautiful and revitalizing. I could get used to it, she thought to herself in private, telling herself that Katsuki was a close friend and that her loneliness was the only reason for her thoughts. Why? Asked Katsuki, who was so preoccupied that she nearly forgot what she had said before laughing and saying, oh, sorry, I spaced out. He just worked on using a towel to dry the dishes without making any remarks. Strangely, he appeared to have learned from her strategy to wait patiently for the other to confess. I'm just not conventionally pretty like you, she said, even though she knew how this would sound. Katsuki paused and gave her a look. Because she was finished too quickly and could feel his red eyes on the side of her face, she busied herself with cleaning the other bowl and making soup, but it seemed pointless. With a final sigh, she gave him the bowl while looking directly into his eyes. After staring into her eyes for a moment, he gave her a smirk that she would consider dangerous. She swallowed as his crimson eyes suddenly shifted from her face to her feet and back again gradually, all the while maintaining this expression inside of them. Given the context of their conversation, it was undoubtedly intentional and shouldn't be taken seriously. Still, the poor woman's throat dried up and her pulse spiked. She hoped she wasn't blushing too much because she thought that if he looked at people like that, they would like him more. Don't fucking go fishing for compliments, Froggy, because you're not a fish, he said. She was thankful that it broke the ice on her strange attraction to him, but she couldn't help but laugh at how incredibly cheesy that sounded. She shook her head and looked at him. Nevertheless, he went on, and you're fucking delusional if you think that picture in that swimsuit would make anyone think anything other than gorgeous and hot. Conventionally pretty, I said. He sprayed her face with soap and water and said, give me a break. He said, we live in a world where people love flashy quirks the most. Conventional is overvalued. Bring me something different every day of the week instead of something fucking dull and traditional. After cleaning her face and palms with the towel she grabbed from his shoulder, she said, okay. Thank you, but that's just your opinion. You do realize that I'm supposed to be dating you? So aside from your own, my opinion is the only one that matters, he inquired, startling her once more. Sue stared up at him, her mouth dry and unable to speak. He was closer than she thought, and he could easily have loomed over her. She couldn't stop feeling her warmth inside her belly, as if he had tampered with her emotions for the third time that evening. While he was staring at her with the same intensity, he grabbed the wet bowl from the sink where she had left it and the towel from her hands, dried it, and placed it on her counter. It certainly felt like the atmosphere around them changed into something heavy and dangerous, so this is less nice, she thought. She couldn't find it in herself to change it, even though it would be much better for her mental health if it remained pleasant and friendly or uncomfortable and tense. Then, as though a switch had been flipped, Katsuki cleared his throat and Sue swallowed. She briefly believed that he would say that he had to leave and wish her a good night in order to avoid the fallout from whatever the hell had just transpired. His now activated phone rang just before he opened his mouth. Sue grabbed the towel to let it dry while the pro-hero rolled his eyes and stepped back. Even for a brief moment, she saw Katsuki grab the phone off her table and flinch. "Who is it?" she asked. "It's this guy from the Hero Association," he said after a moment of silence. "Aren't you going to answer?" she asked, perplexed by the sudden change in the atmosphere in the kitchen. "The agency or Hero emergency hotline would have called if it was an emergency," he said tensely. He was trying to persuade more than just her, and Sue could tell. She observed him for a moment before Katsuki calmed down and the phone ceased ringing. "What's the issue?" "A lot of things," the ash blonde said, putting the phone in his pocket and then vigorously brushing his hair. Not liking how quickly Katsuki seemed to lose his generally positive mood, she gave it some thought and tried again. "What's the problem right now?" she asked herself. "I don't think anyone from the Hero Association is happy about me taking Deku's place, aside from All Might," he said, turning to face her while leaning his back against the table. "It doesn't really matter if the public loves me or not, which not everyone does. I was essentially given this ultimatum by the Hero Association. They were quite outspoken about Deku just moving out and living with me and such." "You didn't mention that," said Sue, approaching. "What could be said?" He crossed his arms and turned away, saying, "I told you, people thought I was nothing but fucking trouble." She felt an odd impulse to take another step. Nevertheless, she decided against it because of the prior awkwardness. What was the ultimatum? "No scandals or major negative press," he stated plainly. "Bad press." Sue stayed motionless. "Like acknowledging that your agency unintentionally made up a scenario in which you were dating someone in order to present you in a more favorable light?" He said nothing in response, but he turned his head away from her once more as she approached him. "It was a mistake," he said. "It won't matter. Kiro, you didn't do it. And the worst part is that when they talk to me like that, I actually want to prove them right and just blow up in their stupid faces," he said, staring into her eyes. "They hate my guts. I kept reflecting on what you, Deku, and everyone else had said, and how I deserved it, but I kept coming back to the realization that I would never be like Deku. Everyone in Japan is aware of that. It's not as though he can replace you in your role," Sue said. "They don't have the authority to do that to heroes," as Katsuki's phone began to ring once more. "No, but they can force me to step down," he said, pulling it from his back pocket so they could both see it was a call from someone in the Hero Association. She scowled as icy chills ran through her body. Everyone who mattered, including Deku, knew that Katsuki had earned this because he had worked hard all his life. He wasn't worthy of being treated badly. Not for this. He was accountable for all of his mistakes. But being the hero of the year, he earned it by working every day, giving up everything else, and doing everything in his power. "That fucker said that just before he shook my hand at the announcement," Katsuki said, her red eyes meeting hers. "They literally told me they couldn't ask for a worse replacement if they wanted to, and they would rather the place remained empty until Deku was back than for me to take it." She hurriedly declared, "He's an asshole," and Katsuki didn't dispute it orally, but he also didn't agree with her. He shrugged and said, "I say things like that all the time." She said, "Yeah, to dumbasses," and for a brief moment, she could see a small smirk form at the corner of his mouth before it vanished. She felt incredibly ashamed of how fatally she was failing and longed to do more for him. The phone stopped ringing as she bit the inside of someone else's mouth, relieving the ash-blonde hero of the decision. "He probably wanted to give me a lecture about causing a media sensation less than a week on the job," she said. "That kind of bullshit from him is anti-media. The worst of them because the others only wanted news that was good for the public or something." This was too much for Sue to bear to watch. This was completely incorrect. If someone was going to be harsh with Katsuki, it would be for his actions rather than something he was not involved in. It was someone else who started the kiss. She was that. He wasn't the one who chose to leak the picture by his agency and refused to pay the blackmailers. It was her, too. Their relationship wasn't announced by him. His agency was that. He had nothing to do with this. However, he was expected to accept responsibility for it, possibly ruining his dream and career before it had even begun. Katsuki moaned once more as the phone rang, debating whether to answer it before saying, "Hey. Yes, I am." Even though her heartbeat became quite loud once more, Sue could clearly hear the other man's voice. Finally decided to pick up. "I see," she said. "If there were a national emergency, I wonder how difficult it would be to get in touch with you." Sue didn't like the man's tone after just one sentence. "Yes," Katsuki took a long time to respond. However, the hotline, not the Hero Association, would have gotten in touch with him if it had been an emergency. Clearly upset, Katsuki shook his head and closed his eyes. "What do you want?" he asked. Katsuki's stomach dropped when the man said, "We received some news and wanted to verify them with you first." He opened his eyes to meet hers. "What news?" "It's completely untrue that your agency attempted to pull a PR stunt by declaring you were seeing pro-hero floppy. Does that sound familiar?" "Yeah," Katsuki said, covering his eyes and rubbing his forehead while looking utterly worn out. Sue was at his breaking point. Watching her friend suffer like this was the most helpless she had ever felt, and it was so unfair. "Remember what we discussed?" "Yes, I do recall. The dinner is ready. Baku-chan." Both men stopped talking when she abruptly called out, and Katsuki opened his eyes and gave her a perplexed look. "Tell him the information isn't real and that we're dating," she said, removing the phone from his ear and pressing mute. The ash blonde blinked at her multiple times, appearing utterly stunned, as if time had stopped. "Bakugo, do you remain there? Tell him we're dating, and the information about the fake PR stunt is the fake one," Sue said, glancing briefly at the phone but apparently keeping her speechless. "What?" he said, shaking his head as he closed and opened his eyes. She urged him to do it. "Are you insane? Bakugo, do you hear me?" As Katsuki continued to shake his head and stare at her as if she had just told him she wanted him to do ballet, the man on the other end of the phone asked. Before he could stop her, Sue grabbed the phone from him and unmuted it, realizing he needed more time. As she pushed at Katsuki, who tried to take the phone away from her right away, she replied, Moshi, Asui Suyu speaking." "What do you do?" he yelled and whispered. Before saying, Asui-san, good evening," the person on the other end paused, presumably taken aback by her response. As she fought to keep the hero away from the phone, the man introduced himself and asked for Katsuki. She finally apologized, saying, "Baku-chan thought he ended the call." Before he went to sit by her table and observe her, Katsuki threw his arms above his head, either acknowledging his defeat or instructing her to do as she pleased. "Could you tell me what this is about?" "Nothing serious," she said, to which the man, for some reason, laughed. "I wanted to congratulate Dynamite on his new relationship and the first successful week of being the #1 hero." Even though Sue couldn't see the man's face, she could sense his patronizing tone and scowled a little. Clearly still in shock, she looked at Katsuki, who watched her and allowed her to say and do whatever she wanted while occasionally shaking his head or stroking his hair. But she wasn't. It might have appeared to be another brief lapse in judgment on her part. In actuality, though, it wasn't this time. She could balance her advantages and disadvantages because she was fully informed. Although she didn't particularly enjoy lying, she had long since outgrown the naive belief that all lies were bad. For instance, it wasn't a bad thing to keep her friends' secrets. In light of this, Izuku intended to give Ochako a surprise vacation in the coming months. For example, she never disclosed to her agency the drug addiction of her former roommate and coworker. Among many other things, she never disclosed to anyone the reasons behind the breakdown of her previous relationship. For a friend, this would simply be another secret she would be keeping. A secret that the relationship between her and Katsuki was phony. "That's very kind of you to say, but our relationship isn't that new," she said, smiling as she met his red eyes. "We just made the decision to go public right now, Kiro." His eyes grew wide, but she wouldn't take her eyes off him. "I see. Do you truly believe now was the best time for something this big to be announced?" the man asked, clearly stunned for a moment. Even though the man on the other end of the line couldn't see her, Sue nodded, saying, "Of course." It was the ideal moment to demonstrate to everyone that they shouldn't make snap judgments based on rumors, poor writing, and historical errors. Sometimes you should give it a try as well. "Kiro, you might be taken aback." "How kind of you to say," the man said after a pause. "I will definitely remember it, on my behalf. Asahi-san, congratulate Bakugo-san. Have a good night, of course." After they hung up, Sue approached the ash blonde to return his phone. He secured the phone in her palm and held her hand instead of taking it. Why, you really did that, the static buzzing around them said. Yes. He clarified, you just said that, Froggy, and she nodded. Keeping her hand in his, Katsuki shook his head. It was warm, and even though his face appeared disorganized, Sue never felt more confident about her decision. What the fuck, Sue? That's okay, she said. How the fuck is it fine? Katsuki shook his head, clearly in a panic and frustrated state. He shouted. Her neighbors might not enjoy his impassioned speeches, so she was tempted to tell him to stop. You. I just told that jerk that we're dating. Yes, she said with assurance, hoping that her friend would take some of it to heart. Katsuki gave her another glance. Suyu. He took a long time to say it, clearly trying to think of what to say, and his red eyes were now unfocused. She waited for him. Not as loudly as before, he declared, we're not dating. Sue nodded, no, but no one has to know that. Katsuki still appeared shocked and astonished, but not as much as he had at the start of this. He kept shaking his head and wandered around her kitchen, lost in thought, before turning back to face her and asking, how? We simply won't correct anyone if they congratulate us or say anything else, Sue said with a shrug. Damn it, Sue, he said, letting her go and wiping his face in a look of extreme annoyance. This shit doesn't operate that way. Have you ever pretended to date someone? No. However, people will simply leave it at that. They will want specifics. Intimate shit, he said, pacing around once more. For example, do you sleep with socks on or not? Baku-chan, you would never answer that even if we were dating for real, and you know it, Kiro, she said, beginning to laugh. Her feeble attempt at a joke still failed to impress him, and he scowled at her in that recognizable Bakugo manner, asking, really, why did you do it? You worked your whole life for this, and it wasn't your fault that the kiss happened, or that we didn't pay the blackmailer, or that the agency messed up, Sue said, letting go of her smile but looking back into his eyes. Sue, said the ash blonde, shaking his head, and it's not your fault. You were attempting to assist, and I wouldn't fucking pay any pussy blackmailer either, and the agency, he said, looking at her mouth and licking his lip before closing his eyes. Katsuki, she said, taking another step closer and aiming to sound as assured as she felt as she looked up at him. He paused his pacing and gave her a look. I can't go back in time and not kiss you, but this, she grinned. I can handle this just fine. We're private individuals and are not in a relationship. For some reason, she felt her face warm up and realized how difficult it was to finally leave, real, considering the number of people who left us voicemails and texts who genuinely think we're dating and how it looked during the interview. He listened to her the entire time she spoke, clearly reviewing what she had said in his mind. Whether it's private or not, people will want to know. Yes, that might be a challenge, but we can still make it work, he said, reminding her of the one problem she perceived with the entire situation. Friends and fucking family will want to know, Sue. For a while, Katsuki watched her, still appearing a little unsure, but since Sue had kind of forced him into it, he couldn't really say no unless he detested the thought of being associated with her, which she knew he probably didn't because he had been so kind to her about it all. She felt somewhat self-aware once more when he approached her and gazed down at her, particularly when he gave her this look. When his crimson eyes viewed her in this manner, scrutinizing every aspect of her face, they were vicious. It had nothing to do with self-esteem. He gave her enough compliments to last for years and made it plain that he thought she was attractive and special. Nevertheless, she couldn't help but experience the warmth and familiar intensity of receiving his full attention in this way. Perhaps this is not the best course of action. All right, he said, sounding a little out of breath, which made her swallow and turn away. Really? Yeah, he said softly, and Sue was overcome with happiness. Yay. But, he yelled, preventing her from cheering and jumping, but preventing her from feeling as though she had accomplished something remarkable, even if it was just because she persuaded Katsuki to agree. Instead of plunging straight into the sensation of contentment and joy, she was thankful that the intensity from earlier subsided. Katsuki said, we need to talk about this shit and set some rules, and Sue nodded in agreement. They had to do all of that, for sure. There would be no use in worrying about things getting awkward and uncomfortable if they had rules and discussed everything, she was certain. Sue lifted her fist for a bump and smiled at him. For a moment or two, he gave her a fierce look. There's no fucking way we'll pull this off, he said, slamming his fist against hers while appearing to despise himself for it. We'll see, Kiro, she said, with an odd sense of assurance. Katsuki put her palms on his arms and sighed, this will be a disaster, and we'll end up hating each other in the end. She could hear honesty and concern in his words. "I swear. Don't make promises you can't keep, Froggy," he said, watching her for a moment before his furrowed brows softened and his face softened as it had on the few occasions before. "You'll see, Baku-chan," she said, smiling at him, "but I don't." 2 days ago, #1 hero geek, oh my god, all of you, put an end to your actions. You can see this? It's official. Froppy is dating #1 hero Dynamite. Dating. Asui Suyu #Bakugo Katsuki #love #Su Baku #1 hero Dynamite #Dynamite #rainy season hero. Froppy #Froggy. Starfire 0.02 days prior answering #1 hero geek. Holy cow. Emoji of a wide eye, 4RL. 2 days ago, DYNADEKUSHO4EVA was. GIRLPOWERJAPAN 546 is being tagged. Did you see this, girl? Was that all we were talking about? Such as? It was 2 days ago. #fake, emoji of gagging. MEGYUMIKUN 2 days prior to answering the real pony. It isn't phony. This is a formal announcement from Bakugo's organization. The picture is authentic. They're actually in a relationship. #Su Baku. 2 days ago, GIRLPOWERJAPAN 546 DYNADEKUSHO4 Evis reply. Heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji, crying emoji, crying emoji. It happened, it really happened. #relationship goals. It was too hot to handle 2 days ago. I'm not that shocked. Have you watched the interview? Attached video. 5 to 64. It was too hot to handle 2 days ago. Right here, heart emoji. Our #1 hero was defending this woman. #Su Baku #relationship goals #Bakugo Katsuki #Asui Suyu #1 hero Dynamite #Froppy. 2 days ago, Tomika-song, he's really attractive. Froppy is a very fortunate woman, fire and winking emojis. 2 days have passed since Hinata Sora Bravo. #Su Baku, long live. Blocked the user 2 days ago. This post was removed. Just 2 days ago, Sweet Baby in image attachment. An image attachment #Su Baku them. Fire emoji, fire emoji, fire emoji. 2 days ago, FOREVERBAKUGOUBRIDE answering #1 hero geek. Oh no. I own Katsuki. #1 hero Dynamite Dynamite Bakugo Katsuki #anti-Su Baku #anti-Froggy I love Bakugo 4 Eva. 2 days prior, Froppy Serpmacy answering Hanahana 795. Dynamite is the fortunate one, and the crown emoji is Froppy. An image attachment 2 days ago, 89 Meme. Isn't the timing strange? They dropped this right after he became the #1? Do you believe Floppy might be prego? An image attachment 2 days prior, Froppy Serpmacy. Answering 89 Meme 2 days ago. No, this is an extremely old photo taken from a terrible angle. She denied these rumors roughly 2 years ago. 2 days have passed since Hinata Sora answering 89 Meme 2 days ago. Indeed. Let the babies be Froggy Dynamite, #Su Baku. Izuocha forever, or TSUBAKU4EVER answering #1 hero geek. #Su Baku. I believe I've discovered my new obsession, heart eyes emoji. An image attachment. So, will we not discuss Su-chan and you? When Katsuki heard that, he stopped moving for a moment, giving that jerk, Eijiro, enough leverage to charge and knock him down while yelling with excitement, "Gotcha. You do, like hell." The new #1 hero was mentally snapped, and he didn't give the other man another chance to win. With a well-timed explosion, he knocked the distracted redhead off him, ready to resume his activities, until he saw that Eijiro had completely stopped using his quirk. Okay. The other hero, who was kneeling on the ground beside him, said, "I admit that was a cheap trick," before raising his palms and grinning pityingly at him. "But can we please talk about this?" he asked. He looked like a desperate puppy as he asked. Not that it ever worked on Katsuki, but the ash blonde had to concede that his sparring partner's fucking upbeat attitude occasionally had the power to positively push Katsuki over his firmly established boundaries and decisions. The new #1 hero, however, would not agree. It was a mystery how the redhead got under his skin and onto his good side. Like the rest of his former 1A class, they were strangers at first. Before he knew it, he was actually texting the moron back or making comments on his clumsy attempts at humor, as well as meeting him for lunch and study sessions. Fucking witchcraft, the ash blonde thought, much less angry about it than when it began 15 years ago. I've been dying to ask all day, Baku bro, please. While glaring at him, Katsuki also relaxed his fighting stance. He had to acknowledge that, whether he wanted to or not, always fucking not, Eijiro managed to keep himself from inquiring about him and Tsuyu ever since he arrived for their sparring season. Since the redhead had already cancelled twice before because his new girlfriend was taking up most of his time away from his own hero work these days, Katsuki was more than ready to do so this week if he was being completely honest with himself. Anyone who wasn't urinating on him, like the staff at his agency, was something the new number one hero dreaded meeting. He wasn't a coward. No fuck. But aside from Tsuyu, he would much rather never talk to anyone about everything that was happening in his life at the moment. The bomb that was dropped 2 days ago about him and Tsuyu was the only reason the ash blonde suspected his best friend, willing or not, became interested in sparring today. About Tsuyu and him. Tsuyu and him. Dating. He cursed in his mind that he had ever consented to that bullshit in the first place, thinking, *T, I can hardly think about it, let alone talk about it. Over the past 2 days, he has repeatedly caught himself reaching for his phone, about to give up on the whole fucking charade, only to change his mind again after seeing the background of his phone showing Tsuyu holding Deku's child. Screw me. He told Eijiro that he was not interested. He stood up, but the redhead lowered his head and clasped his palms together as if he were pleading with a god, saying, "Please, Baku bro. I only have a few questions. You never really dated anyone, and it's Su-chan," explained the other hero. "I just want to talk." Katsuki stopped moving for a second. What on earth is he talking about? Katsuki dated, well, maybe not holding hands, kissing in public, going furniture shopping, or anything else that fuck couples do. He did, however, have a good number of partners. However, he couldn't recall ever discussing real dating, relationships, or hookups with those women. He was a little taken aback to learn that he most likely never had dinner or drinks with any of those women, especially when there was no sexual activity going on. If they ate, it was because they had a meal together before moving on to another location. The realization made his mouth taste bitter. Nevertheless, he ignored it in order to hear Eijiro's next words. "It doesn't have to be anything significant or personal," the redhead said. "I would never, disrespect you or Su-chan," and he actually looked a little embarrassed when he brought it up. This was fortunate because Katsuki didn't want to be disgusted by anything personal about him or the dark-eyed sea witch who fucking hexed him, or anything else that would go along with this bullshit charade to save his face and reputation. Nevertheless, Katsuki experienced the familiar effect of budging more and more as he observed his friend. He did the same thing with Tsuyu a few days ago, but this time he didn't look at Eijiro's fucking mouth. What on earth was that? Since he couldn't recall the last time things got this intense without sex, he asked himself this question numerous times after that night in Tsuyu's kitchen. There was absolutely no way in hell that sex was involved, not that it would be, given his and Tsuyu's arrangement. Whatever the case, Tsuyu was his friend. Why am I even considering this shit? Whatever, Katsuki said, trying to sound casual, and began to move to the side of his private gym. As if she were a middle school girl eager to hear a juicy rumor, Eijiro eagerly ran after him, saying, "Well, firstly, it was pretty obvious something was going on between you two. When your mom saw Su-chan and realized she had come for you, you should have seen how thrilled she was to speak with her. Did you two discuss it?" After dropping a water bottle on the floor, the ash blonde picked it up and began to occupy himself by taking a long, irate gulp. Like, I have no idea. Fuck. After he was announced as the number one hero, his old hag bullied him, saying things like, "Oh, so nice. Su-chan came to support you. She is very courteous and attractive. However, I find it hard to understand why she would waste her time with someone as uncivil as you. However, you did defend her during the interview, didn't you? How could she have discovered this before us?" "Trust me, the old hag more than delivered on that front," Katsuki said after he had finally finished drinking and wiped his mouth with his palm. "She also used Baku-chan whenever she could, which irritated the living daylights out of it. When Tsuyu used it, it worked perfectly. He was used to it by now, and she would gladly call him that if they weren't trying to pull off their charade. However, did he really want that name to be applied to him? Denki tried once, but Katsuki punched him so hard in the gut that his classmate was unable to breathe normally for a full minute. Without a doubt, Eijiro laughed. She was ecstatic about her. Su-chan is fantastic, which is fair. When Katsuki heard the other hero say that, he paused. He couldn't explain it, but it meant a lot to the Ash Blonde to hear him say he approved of him in something. Maybe because he frequently used the redhead as his social compass in high school on certain things he couldn't relate to on his own. Since Katsuki would like to believe that he matured and improved at managing particular situations, it didn't occur as frequently. However, the fact that it only occurred now, after all this time, and that his partner, the word, girlfriend, still gave him a strange, fishy taste, chosen him made him feel proud, as though he had done a good job. He discovered himself concurring. Since it was the truth, it wasn't difficult. Even without everything she had done for him thus far, Asui Tsuyu was amazing. What are you interested in knowing? He looked at him and asked. As Eijiro exhaled, everything, his whole face lit up like a brat's when it's time to open presents. Die. Katsuki snapped. Whatever goodwill and generosity he had felt just a moment before was rightfully gone. As Katsuki began to stand up, Eijiro leapt in front of him and touched his chest with his hand. Nevertheless, he refrained from doing so because he was aware that the Ash Blonde was sensitive to physical contact when agitated. Okay, don't be so grumpy. Simply put, when did it begin? Eijiro inquired. Crossing his arms, Katsuki made his way to the locker room by the gym. His staff still trembled in terror, bowing to him in deference or fleeing whenever they saw him because of his outburst over their blunder, even after 2 days had passed. He was clearly still angry with them even when he came back the following day and told them to leave the story alone. Only Tsuyu's ability to soothe him kept them safe from being killed or fired. He thought, irritated, that they would deserve much worse. Particularly his publicist, who he was still not entirely certain wasn't responsible for the accident. The man said he had no idea how the error occurred, but Katsuki wasn't buying it. At least not completely. He had been working with his publicist for some time, so this kind of blunder was out of character for him. He usually double-checks everything before posting, especially when it's something Katsuki made clear was very important, like maintaining Tsuyu's reputation. Overall, the situation was suspicious. After the initial order to confirm the kiss but portray it as a simple error made during a night away from their hero responsibilities, the person who posted the photo of them kissing and provided the agency's official statement claimed that he came to his computer and discovered a note attached to it, stating that he and Tsuyu were an item. But even though he swore the note must have been on his desk where he left it, the jerk couldn't find it anywhere when Katsuki went to bring hell down on him. He called the publicist to get clarification before posting the news. However, he was too busy to mention that he was fucking going to out a secret relationship like a moron, so he only sent him a brief text message asking if he should implement the changes. According to his publicist, he only consented because he gave one of the assistants instructions to pass along a note with a change requesting that they bring up one of Tsuyu's most recent rescue operations. Even though Katsuki was aware that going out, drinking, and making up with friends was nobody's business, it would serve as a reminder to the public that she was a truly good heroine. What pointless bullshit this whole image thing is. Katsuki aspired to be a hero who triumphed over everyone he faced. Tsuyu wished to support both the environment and people. They didn't do this for the fame, but they still had to follow the rules or risk losing their dreams. What a bunch of bullshit. No matter how many people were assigned to search, none of the notes were located, despite the assistant who took them swearing that she left them on the keyboard and went off to do other things. This fact made something very evident, but it did not fully explain the situation. Someone was either lying, aware of the notes, or saw them and chose to alter them without the 3 primary parties' knowledge. Katsuki didn't think either of those options sounded legitimate, and he detested the idea that someone from his staff would betray him in this way after he had spent so much time working with them and starting his agency from the ground up. The worst part was that he honestly couldn't tell who could have done this, so he couldn't even trust any of the jerks to look into it. Even 2 days after the entire ordeal, working with the Ash Blonde was undoubtedly a fucking nightmare for everyone, and Katsuki had no intention of things improving anytime soon. He reasoned that if they are scared, they will at least think twice before acting in such a manner again. Even now, as he and Eijiro walked, he heard someone running away, and he closed the door as quietly as possible. The worst thing was that he was only able to discuss this with Tsuyu because if it had been true, people might have wondered why he was so furious. Nobody was aware that he and Tsuyu were not a romantic couple. So, nobody would realize that this was a sabotage attempt. His staff only believed that he was furious about the behavior and that he and Tsuyu weren't yet prepared to go public. He wasn't interested enough to find out if they purchased it. They assumed it was the truth, though, because Tsuyu showed up at his agency and prevented him from apeshitting on their asses. Katsuki was okay with that. even though he was still not sure about the entire experience. A few months ago, Katsuki said hazily after he was certain they were by themselves. He and Tsuyu decided that the best way to play their fake thinga after his agency's blunder was to stick to being private and circle around things they could keep track of without having to lie too much. After the interview, Eijiro asked enthusiastically, and Katsuki shrugged his shoulders and said, "Sure. That's really awesome," the redhead said, beaming and practically beaming with joy, which annoyed the ash blonde a little. "You know, my girl watched the show online that day and she reported that you two had a lot of chemistry and would make a cute couple. I suppose she was, huh?" The ash blonde muttered, "I guess," and then scowled. He couldn't fathom how it was that people were always discussing such nonsense. From strangers on the internet to Katsuki's staff and colleagues, everyone has been congratulating him and saying they could tell something was there because of that interview ever since the fake news started. Before he looked at Eijiro, he thought, they couldn't tell shit, lying pricks. He had previously regarded Eijiro's new girlfriend as intelligent. He was undoubtedly the smartest one. He felt that he gave his friend too much credit now that they had dated. What were they supposed to see? There is absolutely nothing there. They hadn't even spoken since the interview until they reconnected at Deku's house, but everyone was acting like they knew something was wrong and acting really smart. The number one hero was getting really mad at it. Katsuki nearly stumbled on a level surface when the redhead said, "We should go on a double date." "The fuck you say?" As he briefly lost interest in the other man, he asked. Needless to say, Katsuki also made a foolish error. Eijiro repeatedly nodded his head in agreement. "Isn't that awesome? You two don't need to be so secretive now that you're in the public eye. It would also be a lot of fun. Su-chan is fantastic." Tsuyu was fantastic. Without a doubt. Not only was Katsuki putting up with Eijiro's new girlfriend, but they could go on a double date while he and Tsuyu were just acting like they were dating. Over my fucking dead body, before changing, they quickly showered in the locker room. When a new message appeared on his phone, Katsuki was able to temporarily avoid having to reply to the double date suggestion. "Froggy. I hope the photo shoot wasn't forgotten." Katsuki gave an eye roll. "No, the fucking photo shoot was not forgotten. Since everyone is talking about the fucking photo shoot, how could I?" After responding to the text, he waited for another message for roughly 2.5 minutes. "Froggy. Don't be so antagonistic. Yesterday, you forgot about it. To be fucking adorable and shit," she included a frog emoji. Mentally tempted to tease her a little for that reason alone, he thought, "She's already bugging me like a real deal would," before hearing Eijiro take a deep breath and exclaim, "Holy shit. How could I have missed that smile, Bakubro?" When Katsuki heard those words, his eyes grew wide. 3 things came to him at once, one more shocking than the others. He was grinning. Really? Of all people, Tsuyu was the reason. Eijiro was present and saw it happen. "Screw me. Anyway," he grumbled, feeling that whatever stress relief he had gained from sparring with the redhead was gone and that he was once again on precarious ice that was about to crack. The fact that his and Tsuyu's reputations would be permanently damaged if it somehow backfired was even more ridiculous than the fucking ridiculousness of it all. Even though most people weren't that intelligent, he and Tsuyu couldn't possibly fool everyone, could they? Perhaps they were singing odes or something over shit in private photos. They would undoubtedly claim that Bakugo Katsuki and Asui Tsuyu were a couple in love and other such things after witnessing them interact in front of a crowd. Faking something that large was not one of his many talents, and he was positive that Tsuyu was not either. "Even your wallpaper features her. Is that Nagi-kun, dude?" "That's so wait." Towering over Katsuki's phone, Eijiro asked excitedly as the ash blonde felt his mood shifting from slightly panicked and stressed to irritated at the redhead's constant attempts to ruin it. "If shitty hair made me feel more anxious than before, what good was a spar with him?" The other hero cooed. They looked so cute together, before his too wide smile softened and became more amiable. This confused Katsuki and made him even more vigilant because he knew Eijiro was going to say something he didn't want to hear. "They almost resemble a mother and son, don't they? With all of their skin tones. She might hold your son that way one day." When the ash blonde heard Eijiro say that, he was fairly certain that his breathing had stopped. He didn't want anyone to see the dumb photo for precisely this reason. Because everyone, including Eijiro, would interpret it incorrectly. How could he possibly say something like that? Why? He knew he couldn't show his internal panic, so the ash blonde tried to calm himself by breathing and trying to avoid having a panic attack. Katsuki's red eyes returned to his phone once he was at least somewhat better than before. Only to see the photo that nearly sent him into a deep hole when he was at Tsuyu's 2 nights ago. He totally forgot that the night they went out for drinks, he had set it as his background image. He nearly passed out when he proposed that he and Suyu read the comments beneath their dating announcement. There was absolutely no rational explanation for why he kept a picture of Asui Suyu and Deku's child as his background and failed to alter it during the nearly 2 weeks that he had it there. He would never be able to explain why he stopped to look at it each time he went to check his messages, the time, or a call.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.